2 days before Christmas, my parents called me crying. "Honey, we're broke this year. No gifts, no party, just trying to survive." My heart shattered. While I lived comfortably as a hospital administrator, they were struggling. Without hesitation, I wired them $15,000, everything I'd saved for months. "Merry Christmas," I texted. "I love you." That same night, scrolling through Instagram during my hospital break, I saw it. My younger sister Vanessa, glamorous, entitled Golden Child Vanessa, posing beside a $100,000 luxury car, twinkling lights, champagne glasses, designer dress. Her caption made my blood turn to ice. "Thanks, Mom and Dad. Best Christmas ever. #blessed #family first." I stared at that photo until the screen blurred. The same parents who just sobbed about being broke had somehow bought my sister a car worth more than most people's houses. A party I wasn't even invited to. A life funded by my guilt and their lies. I didn't call, I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I logged into every shared account and canceled everything. Every automatic payment. Every utility bill I'd been covering for 3 years. Then I blocked their numbers and went to bed with a cold clarity I'd never felt before. 1 month later, they appeared on my doorstep, desperate, crying, begging for mercy. But by then, I'd already started digging. And what I found buried in my family's finances was so much darker than a stolen Christmas. A forged inheritance, a stolen trust fund, a conspiracy that went all the way to my grandfather's deathbed, and a financial predator who'd been systematically destroying families like mine for years. This is the story of how I took it all back and made every single one of them pay. Stay until the end. You won't believe where this goes. My name is Claudia Pierce. I'm 36 years old, and for the past decade, I've worked as a hospital administrator at Cedar Valley Medical Center. It's demanding work, endless budget meetings, staff scheduling crises, insurance nightmares, but it pays well, and I've built a comfortable, quiet life for myself. I live alone in a modest condo, drive a reliable sedan, and pride myself on being the responsible one in my family, the one people can count on, the one who always shows up. 2 days before Christmas, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. I was in my kitchen, still in my bathrobe, pouring coffee when I saw Mom flash across the screen. My stomach tightened instinctively. Early calls from my parents were never good news. "Honey?" My mother's voice trembled on the other end, small and embarrassed in a way that made my chest ache. "I'm so sorry to bother you during the holidays. I know you're busy." "Mom, what's wrong?" I set down my mug, already calculating how much I had in savings. There was a long pause, then my father's voice in the background, gruff and defeated. "Just tell her, Ellen." My mother exhaled shakily. "We're broke this year, sweetheart. Completely broke. There won't be any gifts, no Christmas party, nothing. We're just trying to keep the lights on and the heat running." Her voice cracked. "I'm so ashamed." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. Here I was living comfortably in my climate-controlled condo while my aging parents were struggling to pay their electric bill. "Don't be ashamed," I said quickly, my mind already racing. "How much do you need?" "Oh no, honey, we weren't calling to ask for money," my mother protested weakly, though I could hear the relief threading through her words. "We just wanted you to know we won't have anything under the tree this year." I didn't hesitate. "I'm sending you $15,000 right now. That should cover everything and give you some breathing room." "Claudia, that's too much." "It's already done, Mom. Merry Christmas. I love you." After I hung up, I sat at my laptop and initiated the wire transfer, watching my savings account balance drop significantly. $15,000. 6 months of careful budgeting gone in 60 seconds. But it was worth it, I told myself. Family takes care of family. That's what my grandfather Leonard always taught me. I texted my younger sister Vanessa. "Hey, did Mom and Dad call you too? Sent them some money to help with bills. Maybe we can split it." I waited for a reply, staring at the 3 dots that never appeared. Typical Vanessa. She'd probably respond in a week with some breezy excuse about being busy. That night, I stayed late at the hospital finishing year-end reports. Around 9 o'clock, I took a break in the empty break room, microwaving leftover pasta and mindlessly scrolling through Instagram while I ate. My feed was the usual December chaos: Christmas trees, gift hauls, family photos, holiday recipes. Then I saw it. My thumb froze mid-scroll. Vanessa's face filled my screen, radiant and perfectly made up, her blonde hair cascading over one shoulder. She stood beside a gleaming silver luxury car. I recognized the emblem immediately, the kind of vehicle that cost more than most people's annual salary. Behind her, twinkling Christmas lights framed an elaborate party scene, champagne flutes on a decorated table. Other guests in cocktail attire, someone's mansion glowing in the background. The caption was worse than the image itself. "Thanks, Mom and Dad. Best Christmas ever blessed. Family first." I read it 3 times. Then I read the comments flooding beneath it. "OMG, so gorgeous. Your parents are amazing. Goals, heart emojis, champagne emojis, fire emojis." My pasta turned cold in front of me. I zoomed in on the car, on Vanessa's designer dress, on the party I hadn't been invited to, on the life being funded by parents who'd just cried poverty to me hours earlier. This wasn't new. This was a pattern I'd been ignoring for years. Vanessa getting the bigger bedroom growing up. Vanessa's college tuition fully paid while I worked 3 jobs. Vanessa's wedding funded entirely by our parents, while they'd given me $500 and an apology. Every Christmas, every birthday, every life milestone, Vanessa received the warmth, the praise, the resources. And I received the leftovers and the responsibility. Something inside me shifted. Not hot anger, but something colder, clearer. I closed Instagram and opened my banking app. Then my utility accounts. I'd been listed as a co-payer on my parents' electricity, water, and gas bills for 3 years, ever since my father's hours were cut at work. I'd set up automatic payments covering hundreds of dollars monthly without ever mentioning it. I removed my name from every single account, canceled every automatic payment, deleted my saved payment methods. It took less than 10 minutes to undo 3 years of silent support. Then I blocked my parents' phone numbers. No angry text, no confrontation, no explanation, just silence. I finished my cold pasta, threw away the container, and went back to my reports. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I'd been the dependable daughter for 36 years, the one who sacrificed without complaint while Vanessa sparkled and took. Not anymore. That night, I slept better than I had in months. 32 days later, on a gray January afternoon, my doorbell rang insistently. When I looked through the peephole, I saw my parents standing in the hallway, my mother's face red and puffy from crying, my father's expression a mixture of shame and desperation. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Yes, honey," my mother began, her voice breaking. "Please, we need to talk." I stood in my doorway, looking at the 2 people who raised me, and felt absolutely nothing. No sympathy, no guilt. Just a cold, analytical curiosity about what excuse they'd rehearsed on the drive over. "We can't come in," my mother asked, her voice small and wounded. "No," I said simply. "Say what you came to say." My father shifted his weight, his face flushed with what I recognized as shame mixed with indignation. My mother wrung her hands, her eyes darting between me and the hallway carpet. Finally, she spoke. "The car was a misunderstanding, sweetheart. A huge misunderstanding." Her words came out in a rush, smooth and practiced, like she'd been repeating them to herself for days. "It was a promotional discount from Evan's dealership. You know, Vanessa's boyfriend works at that luxury car place downtown. Well, their financial advisor, Graham Cole. Such a lovely man, very professional. He arranged everything. It barely cost us anything." I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe, saying nothing, just watching. My mother's voice had that strange, rehearsed quality, like an actor delivering lines she'd memorized but didn't quite understand. She kept glancing at my father as if checking whether she was getting the story right. "Graham said it was an investment opportunity," she continued, filling the silence I refused to break. "Something about dealer incentives and tax write-offs. He handles all our financial planning now. He's been such a blessing." My father finally looked up, but his eyes couldn't quite meet mine. They slid to the wall just past my shoulder. "It's complicated financial stuff." I let the silence stretch between us thick and uncomfortable. My mother fidgeted with her purse strap. My father's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't spit out. Neither of them could explain why, if it was Evan's discount and Graham's arrangement, Vanessa's caption had thanked them. Neither could explain how they'd afforded even a discounted luxury car the same day they'd cried poverty to me. The contradictions hung in the air like smoke, and I watched them both pretend not to see it. "So you drove all the way here to tell me that?" I asked finally. "We drove here because you cut us off," my father said, his shame beginning to curdle into defensiveness. "You blocked our numbers. You canceled the utility payments. The electric company called us Claudia. Do you know how humiliating that was? I imagine it was about as humiliating as begging your daughter for money and then buying your other daughter a $100,000 car the same day." My mother reached for my hand, and I let her take it, curious to see what came next. Her fingers were cold and trembling. "We did our best raising you, honey. We sacrificed everything. Do you remember that little apartment we lived in when you were born? Your father worked 2 jobs. I sewed your clothes by hand because we couldn't afford store-bought. We gave you everything we possibly could." "I know you did," I said quietly. "Which is why I've given you $30,000 to cover your mortgage arrears over the past 5 years. $8,000 for medical copays when Dad needed that surgery. 3 consecutive years of property taxes that I paid without you even asking. 3 years of utility bills, electricity, water, gas that I've been covering automatically every single month." My father's face darkened. "We never asked you to do that." "You didn't have to ask. I did it because I'm your daughter. Because I thought that's what family does." I paused. Apparently I was wrong about what family means. "You've always been ungrateful," my father muttered, and there it was. The script I'd been waiting for. "Everything we did for you, and you throw it back in our faces the moment things get hard. Vanessa appreciates us. She calls every week. She visits. She knows what family means." The words should have hurt. For 36 years they had hurt. But standing there in my doorway, I felt nothing but a distant recognition, like watching a play I'd seen too many times before. Claudia the ungrateful. Claudia the cold one. Claudia who could never quite measure up to golden, warm, appreciative Vanessa. "I'll help you," I said, and watched hope flare in my mother's eyes. "On one condition. You open your finances completely to me. Bank statements, bills, this Graham Cole's paperwork, everything. I want to see where your money is actually going." My father's face went from red to purple. "Absolutely not. Our finances are none of your business." His voice was rising now, that righteous fury I recognized from every childhood argument I'd ever lost. "You have no right to demand that. You should be thankful you got anything at all. After what Leonard left us, you'd think—" He stopped so abruptly, it was like someone had physically grabbed the words from his mouth. His eyes went wide. My mother's hand flew to her lips. "Tom," she whispered urgently. My pulse quickened, a slow, deliberate pounding in my ears. "What did Grandpa Leonard leave you?" "Nothing," my father said too quickly. "I didn't mean anything. Forget I said that." "What did Leonard leave?" I repeated, my voice very quiet now. "It's nothing important." My mother jumped in her words, tumbling over each other in panic. "Just old family business. Nothing you need to worry about. We should go, Tom. It's getting late." "What inheritance are you talking about?" But they were already backing away, my father's hand on my mother's elbow, practically pulling her toward the elevator. I heard my mother's hushed, urgent voice carrying back down the hallway, my father's sharp, angry response. Then the elevator doors closed, and they were gone. I stood in my doorway for a long moment, my mind racing. Then I went inside, locked the door, and leaned against it. My grandfather Leonard had died 5 years ago. I'd been there at his bedside holding his hand when he took his last breath. He'd looked at me with such clarity and whispered, "You're going to be just fine, Claudia girl. You've got integrity, and that's worth more than gold." In 5 years, no one had ever mentioned an inheritance. Not once. That night, I lay awake in the dark, staring at my ceiling as shadows from passing cars swept across the walls. My father's words played over and over in my mind like a song I couldn't stop hearing. After what Leonard left us, you'd think, what had my grandfather left them? And why had no one ever told me about it? The next morning, I called Aunt Mabel before I could talk myself out of it. She was my grandfather's younger sister, a sharp-tongued widow who'd never quite approved of my father and had no problem saying so. If anyone would tell me the truth about Leonard's estate, it would be her. "Claudia, sweetheart," she answered on the second ring, her voice bright with surprise. "What a lovely surprise. Come over this afternoon. I'll put the kettle on." Aunt Mabel's cottage sat at the end of a quiet street lined with oak trees, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a storybook. Inside, every surface was covered with photo albums, porcelain figurines, and plants in varying states of health. She settled me at her kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and a plate of shortbread cookies, studying my face with those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "You look tired," she said bluntly. "And you didn't drive all the way out here just to visit your old aunt. What's wrong?" I wrapped my hands around the warm teacup. "I need to ask you about Grandpa Leonard's estate. Did he leave anything to me and Vanessa?" Mabel's expression shifted immediately, her mouth tightening. "So they never told you?" My heart began to pound. "Told me what?" She set down her own teacup with a deliberate clink. "Your grandfather created an education trust before he died. Split right down the middle $150,000 for each of you girls. He was absolutely adamant about it being equal. You know why?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "Because he watched his own siblings tear each other apart over inheritance when their parents died. He swore he'd never do that to his grandchildren. He made Tom promise, made him swear on a Bible that both you girls would get exactly the same." Mabel leaned forward, lowering her voice. "After Leonard passed, your father became the trustee, said he'd manage everything responsibly and transparently. Those were his exact words." The room felt suddenly too warm. When was I supposed to receive my share? "Leonard set it up so you could access it for education expenses, college, graduate school, professional development. After you turned 30, whatever was left would be released to you directly." Mabel paused, her gaze sharp. "I asked your father about your share 3 years ago at Thanksgiving. You were 33 then. He told me you'd already received it, that you'd used it for grad school. He seemed irritated that I was even asking." "I never went to grad school," I said quietly. "I worked 3 jobs to get through my bachelor's degree. I've never seen a penny of any trust." Mabel's face hardened in a way that reminded me powerfully of Leonard. "That son of a bitch!" I stayed another hour, but my mind was already racing ahead. When I finally left, Mabel hugged me tightly at the door. "Get what's yours, honey. Leonard wanted you to have it. Don't let them steal his last gift to you." Back at my apartment, I went straight to the filing cabinet in my spare bedroom where I kept old financial records. I'd always been meticulous about documentation, a habit from my hospital administration work. I pulled out folders dating back 5 years and spread everything across my dining table. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Then I started matching dates. The first mortgage payment I'd covered for my parents' $15,000 sent in March 3 years ago corresponded with a line item on one of their old bank statements I'd glimpsed once when helping them with paperwork. It was labeled Trust Distribution Education Fund. The amounts matched exactly. My hands started shaking as I found more. The $8,000 for my father's medical copays appeared as another trust distribution. The property tax payments. Even smaller amounts, $1,000 here, $2,000 there. Every single time I'd wired them money believing I was helping them through hard times, there was a corresponding trust withdrawal. I sat back in my chair feeling physically sick. My generosity hadn't been generosity at all. I'd been unknowingly replacing money they were stealing from me. They were using my trust fund to cover their expenses, then manipulating me into giving them cash to maintain the illusion that the trust was still intact. And the $15,000 I'd sent at Christmas, I pulled out my calculator and checked Vanessa's Instagram post again. The car was listed at $98,000 on the dealer's website. A typical luxury car down payment would be 15 to 20%. My Christmas gift had funded my sister's car down payment. Money stolen from my inheritance had paid for the rest. I spent the next 2 hours drafting an email to First Cedar Savings requesting any and all archived records related to Leonard Pierce's estate and the education trust established in his name. I provided my identification proof of relationship and cited my legal right to information about assets designated for my benefit. I expected it would take days, maybe weeks, to hear back. Banks moved slowly, especially for records that were 5 years old. The response came 3 hours later, but it wasn't from the bank's official records department. It was from a personal email address I didn't recognize. I was there when it changed. Meet me if you want the truth. HW. I stared at the message for a long time, my cursor hovering over the reply button. HW could be anyone. A former bank employee maybe, or someone from Leonard's legal team. Or it could be a trap, someone connected to my parents trying to find out how much I knew. But Mabel's words echoed in my mind. Get what's yours. Don't let them steal his last gift to you. I took a breath and typed a single sentence. When and where. My finger hovered over the send button for just a moment. Then I clicked it and watched the message disappear into the digital void. Somewhere out there, someone knew what had happened to my grandfather's trust. Someone had been there when everything changed. And in a few hours or days, I would meet them and finally learn the truth about what my family had done. I just had no idea how much worse it was going to get. While I waited for HW to respond, I decided I needed to see my parents' financial documents firsthand. I called my father the next morning and told him I wanted to help them organize their tax files for the upcoming year. He was suspicious at first, but I kept my voice light and helpful, the dutiful daughter offering practical assistance. Finally, he agreed, though I could hear the reluctance in his voice. I drove to the house on Maple Lane on a gray Saturday morning, the kind of day where the sky and the bare trees blend into one colorless mass. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling slightly around the window frames, the garden that my mother used to tend now overgrown with winter weeds. My mother answered the door with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Claudia, sweetheart, what a nice surprise. What brings you by?" "I called Dad yesterday, Mom. I'm here to help with the tax files, remember?" She blinked at me, confusion flickering across her face. "Oh, yes, of course." She stepped aside to let me in, and I noticed she was wearing 2 different slippers, one blue and one gray. In the kitchen, she offered me coffee and asked pleasantly what day it was. I told her it was Saturday. Less than 10 minutes later, while I was hanging up my coat, she asked again. "Is it Saturday or Sunday, dear? I can never keep track anymore." "Saturday, Mom," I said gently, watching her carefully now. "That's what I thought." She smiled and went back to wiping down counters that already looked clean. I decided to test something. "Mom, do you remember the money I sent you at Christmas, the $15,000? Her face went completely blank, like I'd asked her a question in a foreign language. "You never sent that, sweetheart. You must be confused." Her tone was gentle but absolutely certain, the way you'd correct a child who insists they saw a monster under the bed. "We haven't received any money from you in quite some time." Before I could respond, her cell phone rang. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and her entire demeanor changed. Her voice sharpened, suddenly clear and focused. "Vanessa, honey?" "Yes. Yes, she's here right now." A pause. "Did you thank your sister yet?" Her eyes flicked to me, cold and assessing, before the vague fog settled back over her expression. "Okay, sweetheart. Love you too." The shift happened so quickly I almost doubted what I'd seen, but my skin prickled with unease. That moment of clarity had been too precise, too purposeful. My father appeared in the kitchen doorway looking uncomfortable. "The files are in my study. Let's get this over with." I followed him down the hallway to the small room that had always been his private domain. He unlocked the filing cabinet with a key from his pocket, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "Just the tax stuff," he said. "Nothing else." But the moment I opened the first drawer, I knew something was wrong. The documents were arranged too perfectly organized with colored tabs and labels, in a way that was completely unlike my father's usual chaotic filing system. I pulled out a folder marked Medical Expenses 2023 and saw that the papers inside looked freshly printed, the ink still sharp and dark, not faded the way documents from previous years should be. I started photographing pages with my phone, trying to be subtle about it. My father hovered in the doorway, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Are you almost done? Your mother needs help with something." "Just a few more minutes, Dad." I opened another drawer and found older bank statements. Some of Ellen's signatures looked right shaky and looping the way her handwriting had become in recent years. But others looked wrong, too precise, as if someone had traced them carefully or used some kind of stamp. I took more photos, my heart beating faster. In the bottom drawer, pushed to the very back beneath a stack of old insurance policies, I saw a yellowed envelope. The handwriting on the front made my breath catch. It was Leonard's distinctive script, strong and confident, "For my girls." I reached for it with trembling fingers. Before I could even touch it, my mother appeared behind me with startling speed for someone who'd seemed confused and vague moments before. Her hand shot out and grabbed the envelope, clutching it to her chest. "It's nothing important," she whispered urgently, her eyes suddenly sharp and focused. "Old regrets, that's all. Things best left in the past." For just a second, her gaze met mine, and there was something in it that made my blood run cold. Not confusion, not memory loss, something calculating and aware. Then, like a light switching off, the fog returned to her eyes. She smiled vaguely. "Did you find what you needed, dear?" I stood there, my mind reeling. "Yes, Mom. I found plenty." I gathered my things and left quickly, my father practically pushing me toward the door. As I drove away, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. The house on Maple Lane receded behind me, and all I could think about was that moment when my mother's eyes had gone clear and cold when she'd moved with perfect purpose to take that letter from me. Someone was orchestrating this. The selective memory loss, the reorganized files, the traced signatures. My mother might truly be struggling with her memory, but someone was using that confusion, weaponizing it. That night, I couldn't sleep. At midnight, I opened my laptop and pulled up HW's original email. My first response had been cautious, asking when and where to meet. But now, after what I'd seen today, I needed more. I needed everything. I hit reply and typed a single line, "Tell me everything." Then I sent it, and waited in the dark for an answer that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. HW responded the next morning with a time and place: Murphy's Diner on Route 9, Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. He signed it simply, Harold Whitcomb. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a booth in the back corner where I could see the entrance. Murphy's was the kind of place that hadn't changed its decor since 1985, with cracked vinyl seats and laminated menus sticky with age. At exactly 2 o'clock, an elderly man walked in, scanning the room with sharp, cautious eyes. He was tall but stooped, probably in his mid-70s, wearing a cardigan that had seen better days. When our eyes met, he nodded and made his way over. "Claudia Pierce." His voice was soft but steady as he slid into the booth across from me. "Mr. Whitcomb." "Harold, please." He ordered coffee from the waitress with a trembling hand, then turned his full attention to me. "I've been carrying this guilt for 5 years. When I saw your request come through the bank's system, I knew it was time to tell someone what I saw. You worked at First Cedar Savings. For 32 years, I was a trust officer. I handled your grandfather's estate, personally." He took a sip of his coffee, gathering himself. Leonard Pierce was a good man, meticulous, fair. When he set up that education trust for you and your sister, he made his intentions crystal clear. Equal shares, no exceptions. He even put it in writing that no amendments could be made without both beneficiaries being notified. My throat tightened. What happened? Harold's jaw clenched. 5 days after Leonard died, an amendment was filed. It redirected your entire $150,000 to something called urgent family medical needs. The paperwork said your parents needed it for your mother's surgery and ongoing care. It had Ellen's signature, a notary stamp, everything technically required. But I knew something was wrong the moment I saw it. His hands trembled more noticeably now. The signature looked traced, not forged exactly, but copied somehow, like someone had laid tracing paper over an old signature and gone over it. And the notary stamp didn't match our internal log. We keep records of every notarization. This one wasn't in the system. I leaned forward. Did you say anything? I went straight to my supervisor. I told him we needed to verify it, that something felt off. He made a few calls, came back looking uncomfortable, and told me to approve it anyway. Harold's voice dropped. He said the family was going through a difficult time, that Ellen had just had surgery, and they were drowning in medical bills. He said sometimes we have to show compassion and not be so rigid about procedures. But my mother was recovering from surgery that week, I said. She couldn't have been physically present to sign anything. Exactly. Harold looked at me with such sadness it made my chest ache. That's what I told him. Your mother was discharged from the hospital 3 days after the amendment was supposedly signed in person. The timeline didn't work, but my supervisor said the financial advisor handling the family's affairs had assured him everything was legitimate. My pulse quickened. What financial advisor? Graham Cole. Harold spoke the name like it tasted bitter. He runs Cedar Senior Planning. Very successful, very charming. He's built quite a business courting elderly clients and offering to streamline their estates. In reality, he helps families reallocate trusts and assets in ways that benefit whoever's paying him the biggest commission. He orchestrated this. Harold nodded slowly. I couldn't prove it at the time, but I knew. Graham has a gift for making exploitation sound like compassion. He frames theft as family preservation, makes people believe they're doing the right thing, even while they're stealing. 2 months after I was forced to approve that amendment, I resigned. I couldn't be part of it anymore, but I've regretted my silence every day since. He reached into his worn leather bag and pulled out a faded manila folder. I kept copies. I probably shouldn't have, but something told me one day they'd matter. He slid the folder across the table. That's a photocopy of the fraudulent amendment. You can see the traced signature here and this notary stamp I called the notary 3 years ago out of guilt. She admitted she never witnessed any signing. Graham paid her $500 to stamp pre-signed documents. My hands shook as I opened the folder. There it was in black and white. My mother's signature too perfect, too mechanical. The notary stamp that had never been legitimate. And at the bottom in small print, Graham Cole's name as the family's authorized financial representative. He's still operating? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Oh yes, he's expanded actually. Has a nice office downtown, drives a Mercedes, takes elderly couples out for expensive dinners, where he convinces them to restructure their estates for tax purposes. Harold's mouth twisted. What he's really doing is bleeding them dry. We sat in silence for a moment. The diner's ambient noise, clattering dishes, muted conversations. The hiss of the coffee machine felt very far away. Why are you telling me this now? I finally asked. Because you're asking the right questions. Because you deserve the truth. And because... Harold reached across the table and gripped my wrist with surprising strength, his watery blue eyes suddenly fierce. You need to understand what you're up against. Cole doesn't bluff and he doesn't back down. Once you challenge him, he fights dirty. Lawsuits, smear campaigns, whatever it takes to protect his operation. He's destroyed people who tried to expose him. You need to protect yourself. I pulled the folder close to my chest. Thank you, Harold, for keeping these, for telling me.
I should have spoken up 5 years ago.
His voice cracked.
I failed your grandfather. Don't let me fail you too.
We parted in the parking lot, and I watched him drive away in an old sedan that had probably been reliable once. Back in my apartment, I spread every document across my dining table under the harsh light of my desk lamp. The fraudulent amendment, the traced signature, the photos I'd taken from my parents' filing cabinet, the bank statements showing the pattern of theft. I sat there until my eyes burned and my vision blurred with exhausted tears, staring at the evidence of how thoroughly my family had erased my grandfather's last gift to me. The next morning, I woke to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. One new voicemail. I played it still groggy. A man's voice, smooth and warm as honey, filled my bedroom. Ms. Pierce, this is Graham Cole. I understand you've been asking questions about your grandfather's estate. I'd love to clear the air and address any concerns you might have. Why don't we meet for coffee? No need for lawyers just yet. I'm sure we can resolve this like reasonable people. Looking forward to hearing from you. My blood ran cold. He already knew. Somehow Graham Cole already knew I was coming for him. I didn't return Graham Cole's call immediately. I spent 2 days researching him, first learning everything I could find online. His website showed a polished professional in his late 40s with silver-streaked hair and an immaculate suit standing in front of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Client testimonials praised his compassionate approach to family wealth management and his dedication to helping seniors age with dignity. There were photos of him at charity galas, shaking hands with local politicians, cutting ribbons at community events. He looked exactly like someone you'd trust with your family's future. On the 3rd day, I called him back and agreed to meet. His office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel, and carefully curated success. The receptionist, a young woman with nervous eyes, led me down a hallway lined with framed certificates and awards. Graham Cole's corner office smelled faintly of citrus and expensive leather, the kind of scent designed to make you feel like you were in capable hands. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, making everything look warm and golden and safe. Graham stood as I entered, extending his hand with a smile that showed perfectly white teeth.
Ms. Pierce, thank you so much for coming. Please sit.
His handshake was firm but not aggressive, calculated to convey confidence without dominance. Can I get you coffee, water? I'm fine, thank you. He settled into his chair with the ease of someone completely comfortable in his domain.
I want to start by saying your parents absolutely adore you. This whole situation has been incredibly stressful for them, and I know it's been hard on you too. We all just want financial stability for the family.
I said nothing, just watched him. Let him fill the silence.
I understand you've been asking questions about your grandfather's trust. His tone was gentle, almost paternal. I want to assure you that everything was handled properly and with the family's best interests at heart.
When your mother had that surgery 5 years ago, the medical costs were staggering. We're talking about life-saving procedures, ongoing care medications. Your father was beside himself with worry.
So you amended the trust?
We rebalanced it, he corrected smoothly. It was a compassionate response to unexpected medical needs. The trust had provisions for family emergencies, and this certainly qualified. We followed all proper legal channels, had everything notarized and filed correctly. He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a confidential tone. Between you and me, these situations are more common than you'd think. Actuarial drift annuitization schedules ensuring elder solvency. It's complex work, but it's what keeps families intact during crises. The jargon rolled off his tongue effortlessly, designed to make me feel like I was out of my depth. But I'd spent the last 2 days reading about trust law and elder financial abuse. I knew exactly what he was doing. I'd like to see the original notary log, I said calmly, and the chain of custody documentation for the amendment. Something flickered in his eyes, quick as a shadow, before his smile returned.
Of course. That's all in our archives. I'll have my assistant pull everything.
He paused.
his tone shifting to something more pointed. "Though I do hope you'll consider stopping these invasive questions that are stressing your mother. Ellen's health is fragile, and the emotional toll of having her own daughter question her integrity, well, it's been difficult to watch." I felt the manipulation in those words, the subtle blame he was trying to plant. My mother's health is exactly why I'm here. If someone took advantage of her during a vulnerable time— "No one took advantage of anyone," Graham interrupted, his voice still smooth but with an edge now. "Your parents made informed decisions with professional guidance, and frankly, Vanessa has been much more understanding about the family's needs. She's emotionally delicate, yes, and financially naive, but she understands that sometimes we have to make hard choices for the people we love." The phrase sounded rehearsed, like he'd said it before to other families in other offices. I filed it away mentally. Graham stood, moving to a small coffee station to refresh his cup. As he turned his back, I glanced around the office. That's when I saw it tucked behind his chair, partially hidden by the desk, was a glossy gift bag with a silver ribbon. The logo on the bag made my stomach tighten. It was from the same luxury dealership where Evan worked the same brand as Vanessa's $100,000 car. I looked away before Graham turned around, but my mind was racing. He hadn't just helped my parents steal from me. He was connected to Evan, to the dealership, to the entire network that had orchestrated Vanessa's car and that Christmas party I'd never been invited to. "I'll have those documents for you by the end of the week," Graham said, returning to his desk. "In the meantime, I hope we can all move forward with mutual respect and understanding. Family is everything, Ms. Pierce. We shouldn't let money tear us apart." I stood to leave, and he walked me to the door with that same practiced warmth. In the reception area, the young receptionist was sorting mail, and she accidentally handed me an envelope along with my visitor badge. "Oh, I'm so sorry." She reached for it quickly, her face flushing red, but I'd already glimpsed the header, Cedar Senior Planning LLC, with an invoice labeled "Consulting Fees, Evans Luxury Motors." She snatched it back, stammering an apology, but the damage was done. I'd seen enough. Outside, the February wind hit me like a slap, cold and clarifying. I walked 2 blocks before I stopped, my breath fogging in the frigid air. This wasn't a family misunderstanding. This wasn't even just about my trust fund. Graham Cole had built an entire business model around exploiting families like mine, using financial advisors and car dealerships, and carefully orchestrated relationships to bleed vulnerable people dry. That night, unable to sleep, I pulled out the old family photo albums my mother had given me years ago. I'd been looking for memories, but now I was looking for evidence. Tucked inside a leather-bound album near the back was a faded Polaroid I'd forgotten existed. It showed me at maybe 12 years old, standing in front of a building with my grandfather. Behind us was a distinctive sculpture of a pelican, its wings spread wide. I flipped the photo over. Leonard's handwriting on the back read, "Our special trip. The real treasure sleeps where the pelican watches." My hands started trembling. I remembered that trip now, just me and Grandpa Leonard flying to Miami for what he called important business. I'd been bored during his bank meetings, so he'd bought me ice cream and let me feed the birds at the marina. I'd thought it was just a grandfather-granddaughter adventure. But what if it had been more? I grabbed my laptop and searched for banks in Miami with pelican imagery. It took 20 minutes, but I found it Coastal Trust Bank with a bronze pelican sculpture at its entrance, specializing in offshore accounts and estate planning. I cross-referenced the date written on the photo with Leonard's financial records from the documents I'd photographed at my parents' house. 3 weeks before my grandfather died, he'd opened an account at Coastal Trust Bank. Not a domestic account. An offshore trust with a name that made my heart stop, Trust B Pelican Preservation Fund. There was a second trust, one that had never been mentioned in any family discussion, never listed in any of the documents Graham had filed. Leonard had hidden money somewhere my parents didn't know about, and he'd left me a clue to find it. The discovery of Trust B left me reeling, but I knew I couldn't investigate it alone. I needed someone I could trust. Someone who knew me well enough to see I wasn't losing my mind. So I called Deborah Mitchell, my former co-worker from the hospital. We'd worked together for 6 years before she transferred to a different facility, and she'd driven me to countless night shifts when my car was in the shop. If anyone would understand what I was going through, it would be her. We met at our favorite cafe on Thursday afternoon, a cozy place with mismatched furniture and locally roasted coffee. Deborah arrived 5 minutes late, bundled in a thick coat, her cheeks pink from the cold. She hugged me warmly and immediately ordered us both lattes, insisting on paying. "You sounded stressed on the phone," she said, settling into the worn armchair across from me. "What's going on?" I told her everything. Or almost everything. I explained the Christmas betrayal, Vanessa's car, the trust fund I'd never received, Harold's revelations about Graham Cole. Deborah listened with knitted brows, making sympathetic noises at all the right moments, her expression radiating concern and support. "Family money messes are the worst," she said, shaking her head. "My aunt and uncle didn't speak for 10 years over an inheritance. It's awful how money brings out the worst in people." "I just don't know who to trust anymore," I admitted, feeling the relief of finally sharing this burden with someone. My own parents lied to my face. Deborah reached across the small table and squeezed my hand. "You can trust me, Claudia. Always." Then after a pause, she asked, "So are you still on any of their accounts? Do you have access to their bank statements?" The question felt reasonable in context, but something about the way she asked it made me pause. I removed myself from the utility accounts. Why? Just wondering how much visibility you have into their finances. It might help to know what other debts they're hiding. She took a sip of her latte. "And this Graham person controls everything now. Most things, it seems. Do you know which accounts specifically? Like, is it just the trust? Or does he have access to their checking and savings too?" I found myself sharing more than I'd intended: the mortgage account, the medical payment plans, even the property tax situation. Deborah listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that felt almost too precise. Which bank held which account? Who was listed as primary versus secondary on the utilities? Had I made copies of any documents? Some instinct, buried but insistent, kept me from mentioning Trust B. Every time the conversation drifted toward Miami or Leonard's final weeks, I steered it elsewhere. I couldn't explain why, but something told me to keep that particular secret close. After an hour, we parted with another warm hug. "Hang in there," Deborah said. "You're doing the right thing. Don't let them make you feel guilty." I felt lighter, walking away, grateful to have an ally. That feeling lasted exactly 4 hours. I was walking home from the grocery store that evening, taking a shortcut through the downtown streets as dusk settled over the city. I passed a French bistro I'd been to once or twice, its windows already fogged from the warmth inside. Something made me glance through the glass as I walked by. Then I stopped dead. Deborah sat at a corner table. Her body language completely different from the concerned friend I'd had coffee with hours earlier. She was leaning forward, one hand resting intimately on the wrist of the man across from her. Graham Cole. His silver hair caught the candlelight as he spoke, and Deborah laughed at something he said, her expression animated and conspiratorial. At the far end of their table sat an elegant older woman I didn't recognize, wearing pearls and an expression of quiet command. She watched their interaction with the detached interest of someone used to orchestrating outcomes. As I stood frozen on the sidewalk, Deborah slid a folded piece of paper across the table to Graham. He glanced at it, nodded, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Then he said something that made all three of them smile. My stomach dropped so violently I thought I might be sick right there on the street. I stepped back into the shadow cast by a street lamp, my breath coming in short, visible puffs in the February cold. I watched them for another 10 minutes, cataloging every gesture, every exchange. The way Deborah's laugh sounded practiced. The way Graham touched her shoulder in thanks. The way the older woman in pearls checked her watch and stood first, the other two following her lead like subordinates dismissing from a meeting. I walked home mechanically, my mind simultaneously racing and numb. Dates, times, witnesses. The cafe where we'd met. The bistro where she'd met him.
The questions she'd asked that had felt too precise, too focused on account access and document trails. Evidence. I was collecting evidence, though I didn't yet know what I'd do with it. The next morning, I texted Deborah to meet me at a park near her house. She agreed immediately, probably thinking I was reaching out for more support. When I arrived, she was sitting on a bench looking genuinely pleased to see me. I didn't waste time. "I saw you last night, at the bistro with Graham Cole." Her face went through a remarkable transformation: shock, panic, calculation, then crumpling defeat, all in the span of 3 seconds. "Claudia, I can explain." "Then explain." The story came out in fragments punctuated by tears that might have been genuine. Her teenage son had needed emergency surgery last year. The insurance company denied half the claims. She was left with $60,000 in medical debt on top of her mortgage and regular bills. She was drowning. Then Evan, Vanessa's boyfriend, had mentioned that a friend of his helped people with financial problems. That friend was Graham Cole. "He offered to pay 1 month of bills," Deborah said, her voice breaking. "Just 1 month to give me breathing room. All he asked was that I stay in touch with you, let him know how you were doing, what you were worried about. He said your parents were embarrassed about their financial situation and he was trying to help them save face. You were spying on me. I thought I was helping keep the peace. I thought he was trying to prevent family drama. I didn't know he was stealing from you, Claudia. I swear I didn't know." I looked at this woman who'd driven me to work on cold winter mornings, who'd covered my shifts when I was sick, who'd been at my birthday dinners and holiday parties. Now she sat in front of me, having sold our friendship for a payment plan. "You sold me for a month's worth of bills," I said quietly. "I'm so sorry. I was desperate. I made a terrible choice. Please." But I was already walking away. Her apologies fading behind me. Betrayal. I was learning didn't always announce itself with dramatic revelations. Sometimes it wore the face of a friend and justified itself with desperation. When I got home exhausted and heartsick, I nearly missed it. But as I reached for my apartment door, something looked wrong. The doorbell camera I'd installed 6 months ago was gone, torn cleanly from its mount. The door frame bore a scuffed mark as if someone had braced themselves while prying it loose. I knelt down and examined the mark more carefully in the hallway light. A partial shoe print, size 11, maybe 12, the distinctive tread pattern of an expensive men's dress shoe. Someone had been here. Someone knew where I lived. And they wanted me to know they'd been watching. The torn camera and the shoe print rattled me more than I wanted to admit. Someone was escalating, trying to intimidate me into backing down. But if they thought fear would stop me now, they didn't know me at all. The next morning, I drove to First Cedar Savings and asked to speak with someone about my parents' mortgage. The loan officer who helped me was a woman named Rita, probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and the patient manner of someone who'd delivered bad news before. She pulled up Tom and Ellen Pierce's file on her computer, and I watched her face shift from professional neutrality to visible concern. "Your parents initiated a reverse mortgage 2 years ago," she explained carefully. "Are you familiar with how these work?" "Generally, it allows seniors to borrow against their home equity." "Exactly. It can be a helpful tool for retirees who are house rich but cash poor." Rita scrolled through the file, her frown deepening. "But your parents have taken multiple cash draws over the past 2 years. Quite a few, actually." She turned the monitor so I could see. The withdrawals were tagged as property repairs and medical incidentals. But when I looked at the dates, my stomach turned. March. 2 years ago, the same month, Vanessa had posted Instagram photos of her newly renovated kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances. June, right after Vanessa had shown off an expensive jewelry collection at a family dinner. November, 1 month before the luxury car appeared in her driveway. The final withdrawal was labeled as a $25,000 car deposit. "These dates," I said quietly, "they line up with gifts my sister received." Rita's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. She'd probably seen variations of this story before. "There's something else you should know. Reverse mortgages require the borrowers to maintain homeowners insurance and pay property taxes. If they fall behind, the loan goes into default and the bank can foreclose. Are they behind? They were. 3 weeks ago, they received a default notice. But then someone made a large payment, $15,000, which brought them current and bought them another year. Rita looked at me meaningfully. That payment came from an account in your name. My Christmas gift. The money I'd sent because I thought my parents were broke and struggling. It hadn't helped them at all. It had simply prevented the bank from discovering they'd been using their home equity to fund Vanessa's lifestyle. I thanked Rita and left the bank feeling sick. My kindness hadn't been kindness. It had been the unwitting grease that kept their theft machine running smoothly. I drove straight to Maple Lane. My mother answered the door with that vague, pleasant smile, asking me what day it was. I told her it was Friday and walked past her into the kitchen. My father sat at the table with his coffee, and the moment he saw my face, his jaw tightened. "We need to talk about the reverse mortgage," I said, pulling the documents Rita had printed for me from my bag.
"That's private financial business," my father said immediately. "Not when my money is paying for it." I spread the papers on the table. "You took out a reverse mortgage 2 years ago. You've been drawing cash against the house and spending it on Vanessa. When you fell into default, my Christmas gift conveniently saved you from foreclosure." My father's face flushed red. "We signed that mortgage to age in place without burdening you kids. It's our house. We can do what we want with it." "Then explain this." I flipped to the notary page and pointed at my mother's signature. "This is dated January 15th, 2 years ago. Mom was in the hospital that week recovering from gallbladder surgery. She was still under anesthesia on the 15th. The color drained from my father's face. He stared at the date for too long, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. My mother, humming softly by the sink, seemed oblivious to the tension. "Dad," I said quietly, "she couldn't have signed this. You know she couldn't have." He said nothing. The silence stretched between us, thick with guilt and trapped lies. He knew. He'd always known. And he'd been pretending he didn't, because acknowledging it would mean admitting what he'd allowed to happen. I left without another word. Outside, I noticed Mrs. Kowalski, the retired teacher who lived next door, tending to her winter flower boxes despite the cold. On impulse, I walked over. "Mrs. Kowalski, I'm Claudia Tom and Ellen's daughter." "Oh, I know who you are, dear." She straightened, pulling off her gardening gloves. "You look just like your grandfather Leonard. How can I help you?" "Do you remember a party at my parents' house about 2 years ago in January?" Her expression shifted, a shadow of concern crossing her face. "The client appreciation thing?" "Yes, I remember. Your parents invited me over for wine and appetizers. There were several other couples there and a young man from a car dealership talking about some kind of special financing program." "Was there anything unusual about that night?" Mrs. Kowalski hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Well, yes, actually. Late in the evening, an ambulance arrived. Your father was slumped at the dining room table, looking pale and disoriented. Everyone was very concerned, but there was a man there, very polished, perfect teeth, who kept insisting everything was fine, that it was just low blood sugar." She frowned at the memory. "The paramedics seemed skeptical, but they treated him and left. The whole thing felt strange." "Do you remember anything else?" "The young man from the dealership, Evan. I think he was showing your sister some brochures in the driveway, laughing very loudly, like he'd had too much wine. And your mother was being helped to bed by a nurse or caregiver, someone professional. I remember thinking it was odd to have a party when Ellen was still recovering from surgery." I thanked her and walked back to my car, my mind assembling the pieces. A party. Graham there with his perfect teeth and smooth explanations. Tom incapacitated, possibly drugged. Ellen barely recovered from surgery. Evan in the driveway already celebrating. And somewhere in the chaos, documents being signed by people who weren't capable of understanding what they were agreeing to. Pattern, motive, opportunity.
I drove home as the winter sun set early, turning the sky the color of a bruise. When I pulled into my building's parking garage, the security guard stopped me to hand over a piece of mail that had been delivered to the front desk. It was a red-stamped bill marked "Past Due" in angry capital letters. Emergency medical services for Tom Pierce. The date made my breath catch. January 15th, 2 years ago. The same night as Graham's party. The same date as the reverse mortgage signing. The same night, Mrs. Kowalski had seen an ambulance at my parents' house. Someone had called 911 for my father that night. And someone had made sure that bill never got paid, never got officially filed, never became part of any record. Until now. The ambulance bill was the key I'd been looking for. If my father had been treated by paramedics the same night that reverse mortgage was signed, there would be medical records documentation that couldn't be forged or explained away. I needed to see those records. The next morning, I drove back to Maple Lane with a HIPAA release form I'd printed from the internet. My father answered the door looking exhausted and wary. "I need you to sign this," I said, holding out the form and a pen. "It authorizes the hospital to release your medical records to me." "Absolutely not. Those are private." "Dad, I can get a lawyer and subpoena them, or you can sign this now and save us both the trouble." "Your choice." Something in my voice must have convinced him I wasn't bluffing. He took the pen, scrawled his signature, and shut the door in my face without another word. 2 hours later, I walked into Cedar Valley Medical Center, my own hospital, and headed to the medical records department. I knew most of the staff, which made this both easier and more mortifying. Sarah, the records clerk, looked up with surprise when she saw me. "Claudia, what are you doing down here? Shouldn't you be upstairs in administration?" "Personal matter," I said, handing her the signed release form. "I need records for Tom Pierce, specifically an ER visit from January 15th, 2 years ago." Sarah's professional mask slipped into place. She processed the request without comment, and 15 minutes later handed me a thin file folder. I took it to an empty consultation room and spread the papers across the table with hands that trembled despite my efforts to stay calm. The encounter summary was clinical and brief. Tom Pierce, age 68, brought in by ambulance at 9:47 p.m. Chief complaint: dizziness and confusion. Vitals showed elevated heart rate and blood pressure. The treating physician had noted mild disorientation and ordered a basic toxicology screen. My eyes locked on the results section. Tom's blood work showed a benzodiazepine trace. The report specified it was consistent with anti-anxiety medication such as Xanax or Ativan. I pulled out my phone and called my father. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice wary. "Have you ever been prescribed benzodiazepines? Xanax, Ativan, anything like that?" "What? No, why?" "Just answer the question." "Have you ever taken anti-anxiety medication?" "No, Claudia, never. Your mother's the one with the anxiety prescriptions, not me." I hung up without saying goodbye. Someone had drugged my father the night he signed those documents. The timestamp on the ER admission was 9:47 p.m. I pulled out the reverse mortgage paperwork and checked the notary stamp 8:15 p.m. 90 minutes apart. My father had signed away his house while under the influence of sedatives, then collapsed badly enough that someone called 911. My eyes caught on something else: initials in the corner of the paramedic report. MC. I photographed the page and then searched the hospital's staff directory on my phone. Marcus Cole, EMT, currently on the day shift rotation. I found him 3 hours later at a 24-hour diner near the hospital, eating a late lunch between calls. He looked up when I approached, his expression shifting from friendly curiosity to wariness when I introduced myself. "I need to ask you about a call you responded to 2 years ago," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Maple Lane, elderly male, possible overdose or medication interaction." Recognition flickered across his face. "I remember that one. The house was packed with people, some kind of party. The patient was slumped at the dining table, clearly sedated." He set down his fork. "What's this about?" "That patient is my father. Someone drugged him that night, and while he was incapacitated, they made him sign financial documents."
I'm trying to prove it." Marcus's face went pale. "There was a guy there, very smooth, expensive suit. Kept insisting we needed to let them finish some critical paperwork before transport. Said it was time-sensitive legal documents that couldn't wait. I told him that wasn't how it worked, that the patient needed immediate evaluation." "Do you remember what he looked like?" "Silver hair, perfect teeth, very authoritative voice, like he was used to people doing what he said." Marcus paused. "And there was a younger guy hovering by the ambulance when we were loading your dad. Kept trying to show me dealership brochures talking about getting me a great deal on a truck. He had a badge from Evans Luxury Motors. I thought it was weird timing for a sales pitch." "That was Evan," I said quietly. "My sister's boyfriend." Marcus pushed his plate away, looking sick. "I should have seen it. I should have called someone, asked more questions. I knew something felt off about that whole situation." "You're telling me now," I said. "That's what matters." He gave me his contact information and promised to write down everything he remembered from that night. As I walked back to my car, I felt the pieces finally clicking into place with terrible clarity. Back at my apartment, I couldn't sit still. I cleared everything off my dining room wall and started building a visual timeline. I used colored sticky notes for different categories: blue for financial transactions, yellow for family events, pink for medical incidents, green for social media posts. I pinned up printed bank statements, photographs of documents, screenshots of Vanessa's Instagram, the ambulance bill, Marcus's contact information. Then I connected them with red string, creating a web of dates and evidence. The pattern was undeniable. Graham Cole had orchestrated everything with precision. He opened doors with his charm and financial expertise. Evan provided the bait luxury cars dealership connections, the promise of wealth. Vanessa played her role, perhaps knowingly, or perhaps as manipulated as the rest of us, posing with gifts and posting gratitude to my parents. And my parents signed documents while drugged, confused, or too ashamed to admit what was happening. I stood back and stared at my wall, seeing not a family dysfunction, but a coordinated con that had been running for at least 2 years. Maybe longer. I was so focused on the timeline that I almost didn't hear it, the soft whisper of paper sliding under my door. By the time I looked, whoever had delivered it was gone. I opened the door and checked the hallway, but it was empty. The envelope was plain white, no return address, no stamp. Just my name typed on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message in clean, emotionless typeface. "Stop digging, or your mother's confusion becomes your fault." I read it 3 times, my hands perfectly steady now. They thought threatening my mother would make me back down. They thought fear would work where manipulation had failed. They were wrong. I photographed the note, placed it in a plastic bag to preserve any potential evidence, and added it to my wall. Then I pulled out my laptop and started drafting an email to every attorney specializing in elder law within 50 miles. This wasn't a family matter anymore. This was criminal fraud, and I was going to prove it. The threatening note had been designed to scare me away from my parents, but it had the opposite effect. If Graham was worried about what my mother might remember or reveal, then there was something in that house I still needed to find. The next afternoon, I called my father and told him I was coming over to help organize tax receipts for the upcoming filing season. He sounded too tired to argue. When I arrived, I found him asleep in his recliner, mouth open, the television playing a game show at low volume. My mother was in the kitchen, and when I told her I needed to look through some old papers in the bedroom, she nodded vaguely and went back to washing dishes that already looked clean. The master bedroom smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. I moved quietly, not wanting to wake my father or alert my mother to exactly what I was searching for. I checked the closet first, then the dresser drawers, moving carefully through layers of clothing and forgotten items. Beneath a stack of my mother's sweaters, my fingers touched smooth wood. I pulled out a small cedar box, maybe 8 inches square, with the word treasures burned into the lid in Leonard's distinctive hand. My heart began to pound as I lifted it onto the bed and opened the hinged top. Inside lay fragments of my grandfather's life. His reading glasses with the wire frames he'd worn for as long as I could remember. His military dog tags from Korea, the metal worn smooth from decades of handling. A pocket watch that no longer ticked. And there at the bottom, the yellowed envelope I'd glimpsed during my last visit. I looked up to find my mother standing in the doorway wringing her hands. Her eyes were clear for once, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger, not fear. Something closer to resignation. "That's Leonard's box," she said softly. "I know, Mom." She didn't try to stop me. She just stood there, a frail woman in a cardigan that was too big for her, as I carefully opened the envelope. The paper inside was brittle with age, covered in Leonard's looping handwriting. It was dated 3 weeks before he died. "My dearest Claudia," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you've found what I left for you in our special place, and you've come looking for answers. I wish I could have told you these things while I was still here, but some truths are easier to write than to speak. When I drafted my will, I originally planned to leave you a larger share of my estate. Not because I loved you more than Vanessa, never that, but because I recognized in you something rare. You're the one who carries hard things without complaint. The one who gives without counting the cost. You have your grandmother's strength and my stubbornness, and I knew you'd be fine no matter what life threw at you. But your mother begged me to change it. She cried and pleaded, saying it would destroy Vanessa to feel less loved, that your sister was more fragile and needed the security of knowing she was treated equally. I compromised. I split everything down the middle and made both of you equal beneficiaries of the trust. But I added one absolute condition to my will, and I made your father swear on a Bible that he would honor it. No changes are to be made after my death. Both girls deserve their full share with no exceptions. I thought that would be enough. I thought the weight of a deathbed promise would protect you both. I'm sorry I underestimated how fear can corrupt even good intentions. Your mother's love for Vanessa isn't wrong. But loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from every consequence. That's not love, it's enabling disguised as kindness. Whatever has happened since I died, know this: you deserved every penny I left you. You earned it through your character, not through any favoritism. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. With all my love. Grandpa Leonard. My hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. I read it twice, more tears blurring the words. When I finally looked up, my mother had moved into the room and was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face crumpled with a grief that seemed to cut through her confusion. "I just wanted peace," she whispered. "I didn't want you girls fighting over money like Leonard's siblings did. They tore their family apart. I thought if everything was equal, you'd both be happy. I didn't think—" Her voice trailed off and she pressed her hands to her face. "I didn't think Tom would let that man change everything. I didn't think it would go this far." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my coat pocket. "Mom, did you know what Graham was doing?" She looked at me with eyes that flickered between clarity and fog. "I knew Tom was scared. About money, about getting old, about not being able to provide. Graham made it sound so simple. Just a little adjustment here, a little rebalancing there. And Vanessa needed help," he said. "She's always needed more help." "I needed help too, Mom, but nobody asked me. They just took." My mother's face collapsed into tears. "I'm sorry. I wanted to keep everyone happy. I wanted to keep the family together." I stood and gathered the cedar box, leaving her sitting on the bed crying quietly into her hands. In the living room, my father was still asleep, oblivious to the confessions happening in the next room. I drove home with Leonard's letter pressed against my heart through the fabric of my coat. That evening, I called Harold Whitcomb and asked him if he knew any attorneys who specialized in elder exploitation cases. "Renee Alvarez," he said immediately. "She's tough as nails and takes cases other lawyers won't touch. She's expensive, but she's worth every penny. Tell her I sent you." I called Renee's office and left a message. Then I sat down at my dining room table and read my grandfather's letter one more time. He'd tried to protect me. He'd seen what was coming even if he hadn't fully understood how it would unfold.
Now it was my job to finish what he'd started. If Graham weaponized my mother's fear and my father's shame, then I would fight back with the only weapons that mattered: daylight documentation and due process. I wasn't going to be silent anymore. I wasn't going to be the dutiful daughter who swallowed her hurt to keep the peace. I was going to be my grandfather's voice speaking the truth he'd written down, but never lived to see honored. My phone buzzed with a new voicemail. I almost didn't listen to it, but something made me press play. Graham Cole's voice filled my quiet apartment smooth as silk and laced with implied threat. "Ms. Pierce, it's Graham again. I've heard through mutual friends that you're planning to escalate this matter legally. I'd strongly advise against that. Let's not make your mother's forgetfulness a public spectacle. Some things are better resolved privately for everyone's sake. Call me back so we can discuss this like reasonable adults." I saved the voicemail, added it to my growing file of evidence, and smiled coldly at my wall of documents. Graham Cole had no idea what was coming for him. Renee Alvarez called me back within 24 hours. Her voice was brisk and confident, the kind of attorney who'd heard every sob story and seen every angle. We met at her office downtown, a sleek space with modern furniture and walls lined with legal texts. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes in sharp, efficient strokes. "You have a case," she said when I finished. "A strong one. But I need more than documents and timelines. I need someone on the inside, someone who can testify to Graham Cole's methods and practices." "I don't know anyone on the inside," Renee smiled thinly. "Actually, you do now. I received a call this morning from a woman named Mira Lopez. She says she worked as Graham's administrative assistant until 3 weeks ago, and she has information you need to hear." The meeting was scheduled for the next afternoon. Mira Lopez arrived exactly on time, a slight woman in her late 20s with nervous eyes and hands that wouldn't stay still. She carried a thick folder pressed against her chest like a shield. Renee made introductions and assured Mira that everything discussed would be confidential and protected by attorney-client privilege. "Thank you for meeting with me," Mira said softly, her accent marking English as her second language. "I have been carrying this guilt for too long." She opened the folder and began pulling out printed emails, internal memos, and spreadsheets. Her hands shook as she laid them across Renee's conference table. "Mr. Cole has a system," she explained. "He targets elderly clients who are confused or scared about money. He offers to help, and at first he really does help. He organizes their bills, explains their options, makes them feel safe. And then," Renee prompted gently, "then he starts making small changes. Consulting fees that are higher than he quoted. Trust amendments that redirect money to family members who pay him commissions. He forges signatures when clients are sick or confused. He uses home health aides to pressure people into signing documents they don't understand." Mira's voice grew stronger as she spoke, anger cutting through her fear. "He has a network: real estate agents, car dealers, insurance brokers. They all refer clients to him, and he gives them kickbacks." She pulled out a specific email and slid it toward me. I read it twice, my vision blurring with rage. It was from Graham to someone named Richard, dated 8 months ago. Caught another dutiful daughter paying twice, once in guilt, once in cash. These family dynamics are gold mines. The more she gives, the more we can take. She'll never see the pattern. He was talking about me, about my $15,000 Christmas gift, about every payment I'd made to my parents over the years, believing I was helping when I was actually funding my own theft. "There's more," Mira said quietly. She scrolled through her folder and pulled out another email, this one marked with a red flag. "This one is about your sister." The email was dated last July from Graham to Evan, marked urgent in the subject line. I read it with my heart pounding in my throat. Vanessa tried to warn her sister last night, called from a burner phone, tried to tell her about the trust situation. I had to shut that down fast. Used the pregnancy scare from last month plus Evan's gambling debt to remind her what happens if she talks. She's trapped now. Won't risk losing everything. Keep her distracted and grateful. The car deposit next month should help.
My breath caught in my chest. Vanessa had tried to warn me. My mind raced back to last July, and suddenly I remembered with sickening clarity. I'd been at the hospital exhausted after a 12-hour shift dealing with a budget crisis and 2 staff shortages. My phone had rung from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Sis, it's me." Vanessa's voice had been tight with stress. "Can we meet? I need to tell you something about Mom and Dad's finances. It's important." I'd been standing in the parking lot, keys in hand, wanting nothing more than to go home and sleep. "Van, if you need money again, I can't help right now. I just sent Mom and Dad a huge check." "No, I'm not asking for money. I need to tell you something." "Can it wait?" "I've been up since 5 this morning and I'm dead on my feet." There'd been a long pause. "Sure, it can wait." The next day she'd texted, "Never mind, forget I called," and I, drowning in work and stress, had never followed up. I'd assumed it was another Vanessa drama, another crisis that would resolve itself. She'd been trying to save me, and I'd shut her down. "Oh, God," I whispered, pressing my hands to my face. "She tried to warn me." Renee leaned forward. "It sounds like your sister was being coerced. Pregnancy scare, gambling debts. Those are classic leverage points. Graham isolated her, made her feel like she had no choice." Mira nodded. "He does this to many people. He finds their weakness and he uses it. With me, it was my immigration papers." Her voice dropped. "He told me he discovered problems with my work visa, that I could be deported if I didn't cooperate. He said he had connections with ICE. I was so scared I did everything he asked." I looked at this young woman who'd been terrorized into compliance, who'd finally found the courage to speak up, and I saw the same pattern everywhere. Graham didn't just steal money. He stole people's sense of safety, their ability to trust their own judgment, their voices. "What made you finally leave?" I asked. "My cousin is a paralegal. I showed her some of the emails and she said what he was doing was illegal. She helped me make copies of everything before I quit." Mira's eyes filled with tears. "But I am scared. He said he would destroy me if I ever talked." Renee's voice was firm. "We can protect you. I'll file for whistleblower protection, and we can get you connected with immigration attorneys who specialize in cases like yours. You did the right thing coming forward." I pulled out my checkbook. "And I'll cover your legal fees. All of them. You're risking everything to help me. The least I can do is make sure you're protected." Mira looked at me with such gratitude it made my chest ache. "Thank you. I just want to do what's right." We spent another hour going through the documents, building the framework of the case. Renee took meticulous notes, occasionally stopping to ask clarifying questions. By the time we finished, it was nearly dark outside. As we gathered our things to leave, Mira's phone pinged with a text message. She glanced at it and went pale, her hand trembling as she showed the screen to Renee. The message was from an unknown number. "Delete those emails. He knows." Renee's jaw tightened. "Don't respond. Don't delete anything. This is witness intimidation, which is a crime. Forward this to me right now." Mira did her fingers shaking on the screen. "How does he know already?" "He has people watching," Renee said grimly. "People who report back to him. This confirms everything you've told us about his network." She looked at me. "Claudia, you need to be careful too. If he's willing to threaten Mira this quickly, he won't hesitate to escalate with you." I thought of the torn camera, the threatening note, Graham's smooth voicemail. "I know, but I'm not stopping. Not now." We walked out together into the winter evening, 3 women bound by a common enemy and a determination to see justice done. Somewhere in the city, Graham Cole was making his next move. But so were we. The smear campaign started 2 days after Mira received that threatening text. I first noticed it when a co-worker approached me in the hospital cafeteria, her expression a mixture of concern and judgment. "Claudia, I saw something online about you and your parents. Is everything okay?" My stomach dropped. "What did you see?" She hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed me a post in our neighborhood's Facebook group. The anonymous account had posted a long, detailed story about an ungrateful daughter who was suing her sick elderly parents over family money, trying to steal their home while they were vulnerable and confused. The comments below were vicious. People I'd never met were calling me greedy, heartless, a disgrace to family values. I spent my lunch break searching and found more. Different community groups, neighborhood forums, even a post on the Cedar Valley Medical Center's public review page suggesting the hospital should reconsider employing someone with such questionable ethics. Each post was slightly different, but hit the same themes: elderly couple facing homelessness, gold-digging sister who wants everything greedy child abandoning parents in their time of need. Then I found Vanessa's share. She'd reposted one of the anonymous posts to her own Facebook page with a sad face emoji and a caption that made my blood boil. I wish my sister could forgive and move on. Family should come first. The post had been shared 47 times and had over 200 comments, most of them supporting Vanessa and condemning me. Within 48 hours, the story had spread everywhere. I walked into church on Sunday and felt the whispers follow me down the aisle. At the grocery store, a woman I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood deliberately turned her cart around to avoid passing me. My apartment building's residents association sent a polite email asking if I'd like to address the concerns raised by recent social media activity. The weapon Graham was using now wasn't financial. It was something more insidious: reputation. The social currency that determined whether people trusted you, whether they'd work with you, whether they'd even look you in the eye. He was systematically destroying my credibility, making sure that by the time we got to court, I'd look like exactly what he wanted me to appear: a bitter, greedy woman with an axe to grind. I met with Renee at a coffee shop across town where I was less likely to be recognized. She listened to my account with a grim expression. "He's testing you," she said, stirring her coffee methodically. "Narcissists like Graham need control. When they can't control the narrative through manipulation, they try public humiliation. It's their favorite tool because it's effective and hard to combat." "I want to post the truth," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "I want to show people the documents, the forged signatures, the emails from Mira. I want everyone to know what he really is." "I know you do, and that's exactly what he wants you to do." I stared at her. "What?" "If you respond publicly, you feed the spectacle. You look defensive. You give him ammunition to paint you as unstable and vindictive." Renee leaned forward, her voice firm. "We don't fight this battle on social media. We fight it in court, where evidence matters and lies have consequences. Right now, we document everything: every post, every comment, every share. We trace IP addresses where we can. We build a case for defamation and witness intimidation that's so airtight he can't wiggle out of it. So I just let people think I'm a monster. You let people think whatever they want while we prepare to destroy him legally. It's called strategic restraint, and I know it's the hardest thing I'll ever ask you to do." She was right. It was harder than anything I'd ever done. Every day I saw another post, another comment, another person who'd decided I was guilty based on anonymous accusations. I wanted to scream the truth, to defend myself, to make them understand. Instead, I took screenshots, noted timestamps, and stayed silent. The worst part came late one Tuesday night. My phone rang with Vanessa's number, and against my better judgment, I answered. "Claudia," her voice was thick with tears. "Please, you have to stop this. Mom is falling apart. The stress is literally killing her. Graham didn't do anything wrong. He was just trying to help our family, and now you're destroying everything with these lawsuits and accusations." Her anguish sounded genuine, and for one terrible moment I felt the old guilt rising like acid in my throat. The instinct to apologize, to back down, to smooth everything over so everyone else could be comfortable. Then I remembered the email Mira had shown me. Vanessa tried to warn her sister last night. I had to shut that down fast. "Van," I said quietly, "I know you tried to call me last summer. I know you wanted to tell me about the trust, about what Graham was doing. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me." Silence stretched across the line. But you need to stop protecting him. I continued, my voice gentle but firm. Graham is using all of us, me, you, Mom, Dad. He's got you trapped with Evan's debts and whatever else he's holding over your head. This call you're making right now, these aren't all your words, are they? He told you what to say. The silence grew heavier. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her wrestling with whether to admit the truth. I have to go, she whispered finally, and the line went dead. I sat in my dark apartment, staring at my phone, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. My sister was trapped. My parents were ashamed. My reputation was in shreds. And somewhere out there, Graham Cole was probably celebrating another successful intimidation campaign. My laptop chimed with a new email notification. The sender was Graham Cole. The subject line was blank. I almost didn't open it, but morbid curiosity won out. The body of the email contained a single sentence. Careful, Ms. Pierce. Blood remembers loyalty longer than law remembers justice. I read it 3 times, feeling the threat beneath the pseudo-philosophical words. He was reminding me that family ties mattered, that blood was supposed to be thicker than legal battles, that I was betraying some fundamental code by pursuing this. But he was wrong. Blood didn't automatically deserve loyalty. Loyalty had to be earned through honesty, through integrity, through treating people with dignity and respect. My grandfather's blood ran through my veins too, and he'd taught me that justice mattered more than keeping uncomfortable peace. I forwarded the email to Renee with a single line, "Add this to the file." Then I saved it, printed it, and added it to my wall of evidence. Graham Cole thought he was winning because I was staying quiet. He had no idea that my silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. And when the right moment came, that patience would be his downfall. Despite the smear campaign and Graham's escalating threats, I couldn't bring myself to completely abandon my parents. On Saturday morning, I loaded my car with groceries, fresh vegetables, the herbal tea my mother loved, easy-to-prepare meals that wouldn't overwhelm them. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it made me weak. But they were still my parents, and whatever else had happened, I wasn't going to let them go hungry. My mother answered the door with a bright, confused smile. "Oh, how lovely, are you the visiting nurse?" "No, Mom, it's me, Claudia, your daughter." "Of course, Claudia." She hugged me warmly as if we hadn't seen each other in years. "Do you still work at that nice restaurant downtown?" "I've never worked at a restaurant, Mom. I work at the hospital. I'm an administrator." She nodded pleasantly, already forgetting. My father sat at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. He didn't look up when I entered, didn't acknowledge the bags of groceries I set on the counter. I unpacked in silence, putting things away where they belonged, noting that the refrigerator was nearly empty except for condiments and wilted lettuce. I made a simple dinner, reheated casserole. I'd brought a side salad bread. My mother hummed while setting the table, asking twice which day of the week it was. My father's jaw remained clenched throughout, his eyes fixed on his plate. Finally, as we sat down to eat, I said what I'd come to say. My voice was gentle but firm. "I'll keep helping with food and medicine. I'll make sure you have what you need to live. But I won't cover up lies anymore. I won't pretend everything is fine. Those days are over." My father's fist slammed down on the table so hard the plates jumped. "You're tearing this family apart after everything we did for you. This is how you repay us, by dragging our name through the mud, by making your mother sick with worry, by turning everyone against us." His face was red veins standing out on his neck. "We raised you better than this." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match his anger. I simply looked at him and said, "I'm saving us from the man you trusted. There's a difference. Graham was trying to help us. Graham forged documents, drugged you, and stole from me. That's not help. That's exploitation." My father opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. He knew. On some level, he'd always known. He just couldn't bring himself to admit it. I finished my dinner in silence, helped my mother clean up while she chatted about a garden she'd planted 20 years ago, and left as the winter sun set early over Maple Lane.
Driving home, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. The loneliness of being right when everyone wants you to be wrong. The exhaustion of fighting people who should be on your side. My phone buzzed with a notification. A video message from an unknown number. I shouldn't have opened it while driving, but some terrible instinct made me pull over into a gas station parking lot and press play. The footage was dark and shaky, like something filmed on a phone at night. Two figures in hoodies grabbed a woman with blonde hair like Vanessa's, and pulled her toward a dark van. A voice that sounded like my sister's cried out, "Claudia, help me please." Then the screen went black, and a distorted voice overlaid the darkness. "Stop the lawsuit or she disappears." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I called 911 immediately, my voice breaking as I tried to explain what I'd just seen. The dispatcher stayed on the line while I forwarded the video asking me questions I could barely process. She said officers were on their way to check on Vanessa's last known location, that I should stay where I was. 20 minutes crawled by. I tried calling Vanessa's number, no answer. Tried texting, nothing. My mind spiraled through every terrible possibility. Then my phone buzzed with an Instagram notification. Vanessa had just posted a story. I opened it with trembling fingers. There was my sister sitting in a cozy restaurant booth across from Evan, laughing as she twirled pasta on her fork. The timestamp showed it was posted 3 minutes ago. She was safe. She was fine. She was at dinner while I'd been having a panic attack, thinking she'd been kidnapped. When the police arrived, I showed them everything. The video, Vanessa's Instagram post, the timeline that didn't make sense. A detective from the cyber unit examined the video file on my phone and shook his head. "This is amateur hour," he said. "It's old footage, probably from a previous night out, edited with basic software and some stock audio. See how the lighting doesn't match, and the voice is clearly spliced in. Whoever made this wanted to scare you quickly, not make it convincing to experts." "Why would someone do this?" The detective gave me a knowing look. "You're involved in a lawsuit, right? Financial stuff. This is intimidation. Someone wants you scared enough to back down." They took a report and told me they'd investigate the source of the message. I drove home in a daze, my adrenaline slowly fading into something colder and more dangerous. Graham was getting desperate. He'd tried manipulation, smear campaigns, threats. Now he was resorting to fake kidnapping videos, psychological terrorism designed to break me. Back in my apartment, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back looked older than 36. Grief and stress had carved new lines around her eyes, hardened the set of her jaw. I thought about my mother's trembling hands, my father's stubborn shame, Vanessa's coached phone call and fake kidnapping. I thought about loving people you couldn't trust, protecting people who resented you for it. This was what real adulthood felt like. Not the independence I'd imagined in my 20s, but this, the terrible responsibility of seeing clearly when everyone around you wanted to stay blind. I texted Marcus, the EMT who'd become an unexpected ally in all this. "I'm not giving up." His reply came within seconds. "Good, neither am I." I was about to get ready for bed when my phone rang. 2 in the morning. Renee's name on the screen. I answered immediately. "Emergency," she said without preamble. "I've been digging through county records all night. We found another deed, Claudia. A transfer on death form filed 18 months ago. Do you know what that means?" My stomach dropped. "No. It means the moment your parents die, the house automatically transfers to the named beneficiary. No probate, no will, no division of assets. It bypasses everything." Her voice was grim. "Vanessa inherits the entire house the second they're both gone. You get nothing. We need to meet first thing tomorrow morning. This changes everything." I hung up and stood in my dark apartment watching the city lights blur through tears I hadn't realized were falling. They'd planned for my parents' deaths. They'd already decided how to split the inheritance, and I wasn't included in those plans at all. I met Renee at her office at 8 the next morning, both of us running on coffee and adrenaline.
She'd spread documents across the conference table in neat rows, and even from the doorway I could see the damning evidence laid out like an autopsy. "This is a transfer on death deed," Renee explained, pointing to the document in the center. "It's a legal instrument that automatically transfers property ownership the moment the original owners die. It bypasses probate, entirely bypasses any will they might have, bypasses any sense of fairness or equal division." I moved closer, staring at the paper that represented the final betrayal. The deed was dated 18 months ago, filed quietly at the county recorder's office, with no fanfare, and certainly no notification to me. Tom and Ellen Pierce. It stated in cold legal language, "Hereby transfer upon death the property located at 847 Maple Lane to Vanessa Marie Pierce, sole beneficiary." Sole beneficiary. I repeated, my voice hollow. They made sure I'd get nothing, not the house, not even my childhood bedroom or the garden my grandfather planted. Renee's expression was grim. "And look at this." She pointed to the notarization stamp. It was from Graham Cole's office, witnessed by the same notary whose name appeared on the fraudulent trust amendment. Ellen's signature trembled across the page, shaky and uncertain next to Tom's firmer but clearly reluctant scrawl. "We need to prove this was procured through coercion and undue influence," Renee said. "That means gathering witness testimony from anyone who saw your parents around that time. We need to build a picture of their mental state, the pressure they were under, who was controlling access to them." For the next week, I became a detective in my own family's neighborhood. I started with Father Michael at St. Catherine's, who remembered visiting my parents that same week to discuss their charitable donations. "Your mother kept asking me the same questions." He recalled, his weathered face troubled. "What day was it? Had I been there before? Where was Leonard?" "She seemed very confused, and your father was agitated, kept checking his watch like he was expecting someone." The mail carrier, a woman named Linda, who'd been delivering to Maple Lane for 15 years, remembered a luxury car parked in the driveway for hours that afternoon. It was one of those expensive silver sedans, the kind that stands out in a neighborhood like this. I remember because the driver was sitting in it the whole time I was doing my route, like he was waiting for something. The mobile nail technician, a kind woman named Joy, who visited elderly clients in their homes, had given my mother a manicure that morning. "Your mom was having a rough day," Joy told me over the phone. "She kept asking me if I was her daughter, if it was time for church, whether she'd already eaten lunch." I do nails for a lot of seniors, and I can tell when someone's having memory problems. That day was bad. I almost suggested she see a doctor. Each conversation added another piece to the mosaic. I recorded everything on my phone, collected business cards, took detailed notes. Father Michael's observation about Tom's agitation, Linda's memory of the waiting car, Joy's professional assessment of Ellen's confusion. Together, they painted a picture of two vulnerable elderly people being maneuvered into signing away their home while neither was in any condition to understand what they were doing. Renee compiled everything into a comprehensive motion. We worked late into the night, her office lights the only ones still burning in the building, as we refined every argument cited, every relevant case law attached, every piece of evidence. At 2 a.m, she filed an emergency motion to prevent the transfer on death deed from being recorded or executed. The motion argued that the deed had been procured through fraud, undue influence, and elder abuse. It requested a temporary freeze on the deed's enforceability pending a full hearing to determine its validity. At 9 the next morning, a judge granted the temporary restraining order. The deed could not take effect, could not be recorded, could not transfer the house to anyone until the court determined whether it was legitimate. Graham's legal team responded within hours. They filed 3 separate countermotions demanding the case be dismissed, claiming I lacked standing to challenge my parents' estate planning decisions, arguing that I was harassing elderly people with frivolous litigation. Their filings were aggressive and expensive, the kind of legal assault designed to overwhelm and intimidate. But Renee had warned me this would happen. "He's going to throw everything at us," she'd said. "Money lawyers, procedural obstacles. But we have something he doesn't, the truth and the patience to prove it." The clock started ticking on deadlines, depositions, discovery requests. Dates were set for hearings. Witness lists were exchanged. This was no longer a family dispute that could be resolved over coffee and apologies. This was a legal war fought in conference rooms and courthouses with rules and procedures and stakes that grew higher every day. I understood now that there was no going back. Even if I wanted to retreat, even if I decided the fight wasn't worth it, Graham wouldn't let me walk away quietly. He'd made this personal, turned it into a test of wills. But what he didn't understand was that I'd learned patience from years of hospital administration, from managing budgets and personnel crises and impossible situations. I knew how to fight battles that took months or years to resolve. I knew how to wait for the right moment. That night, exhausted and wired with nervous energy, I returned to my apartment to find something I hadn't left there. Sitting on my kitchen counter next to my keys where I'd definitely see it was a burner phone. A cheap flip phone, the kind you could buy with cash at any convenience store. My skin crawled. Someone had been inside my apartment. Again. As I stood staring at it, the phone buzzed with a text message. I picked it up with shaking hands and read, "Parking garage, level 3, midnight. I have the recording you need. Come alone." I checked the time. It was 9:30. I had 2.5 hours to decide whether to walk into what might be a trap, or ignore what might be the evidence that would end this nightmare once and for all. I thought of my grandfather's letter of Harold's warning of Marcus's quiet support of Mira's courage in coming forward. I thought of every person who'd been hurt by Graham's operation, and every family he'd manipulated. Then I forwarded the message to Renee with a note. "I'm going. If you don't hear from me by 12:30, call the police." I arrived at the downtown parking garage at 11:55, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The structure was mostly empty at this hour, shadows pooling between the concrete pillars under flickering fluorescent lights. I parked on level 3 as instructed and sat with my doors locked, scanning every corner for movement. At exactly midnight, a figure emerged from behind a pillar about 20 feet away. A young man, maybe mid-20s, wearing a catering company jacket and looking terrified. He held up both hands to show they were empty, then slowly approached my car. I rolled down my window halfway. "Are you Claudia Pierce?" His accent marked him as a native Spanish speaker, his English careful and precise. "Who are you?" "My name is Miguel Herrera. I work for Prestige Catering. 2 years ago, I served at a party at your parents' house." He pulled a flash drive from his jacket pocket with shaking hands. "I have something you need to see. Can I sit in your car? I promise I'm not here to hurt you. I just don't want anyone to see us talking." I studied his face, saw genuine fear there, and unlocked the passenger door. He slid in quickly, glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to appear at any moment. "I've been carrying this guilt for 2 years, he said, pressing the flash drive into my hand. "That night at your parents' house, I was setting up the bar in the dining room. My boss makes us record our setups on our phones so he can review them later and make sure we're following protocol. I had my phone propped on the bar recording while I arranged glasses and bottles. I forgot it was running for almost 40 minutes. What did it capture? Everything. The conversation, the signing, what happened after." His voice dropped. I didn't realize what I'd recorded until months later when I was clearing old videos from my phone. By then, I didn't know what to do with it. I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of getting involved in something dangerous, but I couldn't delete it either. And then I saw the posts online about you suing your parents, and I thought maybe you needed proof of what really happened that night. My laptop was in my bag in the back seat. I pulled it out with trembling hands and booted it up, then plugged in the flash drive. Miguel watched nervously, his knee bouncing with anxiety. The video file opened. The footage was grainy and showed mostly the bar area, bottles, glasses, Miguel's hands arranging things. But the audio was crystal clear. I could hear multiple conversations happening at once, the ambient noise of a party. Then, cutting through everything else, I heard my sister's voice. "Just sign it, Dad. Please. I'll handle all the bills, I promise. You won't have to worry about anything." Then Graham's voice, smooth and urgent in a way that made my skin crawl. "Tom, we need your signature now." Right now, before the ambulance gets back and this opportunity passes. This is time-sensitive documentation that can't wait." My mother's voice, faint and groggy, barely audible. "He's too tired. He needs to rest. Can't this wait until morning?" "Ellen, sweetheart, we talked about this." Graham's voice again, patronizing and firm. "Tom understands what needs to happen. Don't you, Tom?" A pause. Then the unmistakable sound of a pen scratching across paper. One signature, then another. The scratch of that pen felt like it was carving directly into my chest. Graham's satisfied exhale came next. "Excellent. Well done. This is going to secure your family's future." Then, distinctly, the pop of a champagne cork. Miguel's voice spoke quietly from beside me. "About 2 minutes after that, your father collapsed. That's when someone called 911. I was in the kitchen by then, but I heard the commotion. The paramedics came, and everyone acted like it was no big deal, just low blood sugar. But I saw your dad's face. He looked confused and sick. I played the recording again, then a third time. Each time the evidence became more damning. Vanessa pressuring, Graham manipulating. My mother, too, drugged or confused to protect her husband. My father signing documents while clearly impaired, and champagne being opened to celebrate what they'd just done. "This is coercion," I whispered. "This is evidence of elder abuse and fraud." "I know. That's why I kept it. And that's why I'm giving it to you now." Miguel reached for the door handle. "I have to go. My shift starts in an hour and I can't be late or people will ask questions. But Miss Pierce, be careful. The man in that recording, the one with the smooth voice, he scares me." "Graham Cole." "I don't know his name. I just know he's dangerous." Miguel opened the door. "Don't tell anyone where you got this. I have a family. I can't afford to become a target." "I'll protect you," I promised. "Thank you, Miguel. You may have just saved my family." He nodded and disappeared back into the shadows of the parking garage. I sat alone with my laptop playing that recording over and over until the words were burned into my memory. The next morning, I was at Renee's office before she'd even finished her first coffee. I plugged in the flash drive without preamble and pressed play. She listened with growing intensity, her pen flying across her legal pad in sharp, angry strokes. When the recording ended, she sat back in her chair and exhaled slowly. "This ends him," she said, her voice hard as steel. "Coercion, elder abuse, fraudulent inducement. We have it all on tape in their own voices. A jury will hear this and convict him in their minds before we even finish presenting evidence. So we have enough now. We have more than enough." Renee pulled out a fresh legal pad and began outlining. "We file a comprehensive lawsuit, elder exploitation, forged documents, criminal fraud conspiracy. We'll send copies to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. And we'll use this recording to support our motion to invalidate every document Graham touched." For the first time since that Christmas morning when I saw Vanessa's Instagram post, I felt something uncurl in my chest. Not revenge, not even vindication. Just the possibility of accountability, which I was learning, was the rarest and most precious outcome of all. We spent the rest of the morning drafting Renee's legal expertise, turning my evidence into a weapon that could actually cut through Graham's defenses. By noon, we had the framework of a lawsuit that would either end his operation or force him into a settlement so comprehensive it would amount to the same thing. I was walking to my car when my phone rang. Vanessa's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Claudia?" Her voice was thick with tears breaking on every syllable. "I'm pregnant. 3 months. Please, I'm begging you, don't destroy my baby's future over this. I made mistakes, but my child doesn't deserve to pay for them." I stood in the parking lot, phone pressed to my ear, and felt the weight of that plea settle over me like a heavy blanket. I told Vanessa to meet me at Riverside Park, a windswept place where we used to play as children. She arrived 20 minutes late, wrapped in a coat too thin for the February cold,
her face pale and drawn. The mascara streaking her cheeks told me she'd been crying for a while. We sat on a bench facing the frozen river, not touching the space between us filled with years of resentment and manipulation and things left unsaid. She looked small and exhausted in a way I'd never seen before. The glamorous Instagram Vanessa had been replaced by someone who looked genuinely terrified. "I'm 3 months pregnant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Evan and I need money to prepare. A place to live, baby things, medical bills. I don't have anything saved. Everything I had went to—" She trailed off, unable to finish. I felt the old instinct flicker inside me, the urge to fix, to rescue, to solve her problems, so she wouldn't have to feel pain. It was the same instinct that had made me wire $15,000 without question, the same one that had kept me covering utility bills for 3 years. But I forced myself to pause, to let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Tell me what you know about Graham," I said quietly. Vanessa's face crumpled. She stared at her hands, twisting them in her lap. The silence stretched so long I thought she might not answer. Then finally she whispered, "He promised he'd help our family if I stayed quiet. He said you'd ruin everything if you kept digging, that you were being selfish and vindictive. He said Mom and Dad needed me to be strong, to protect them from your anger." Her voice broke. "I was scared, Claudia. I'm still scared. He knows things about Evan, about debts and people he owes money to. He said he could make those problems go away, or make them 100 times worse." I looked at my sister and saw, maybe for the first time, past the vanity and the entitlement to the frightened young woman underneath. She'd been caught in Graham's web just like the rest of us, manipulated and controlled and convinced she had no choice. Before I could respond, my phone rang. My father's number. I almost ignored it, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Your mother is asking for you," my father said, his voice strange and tight. "You need to come now. She's different today. Lucid. I don't know how long it will last." I told Vanessa to wait and drove to Maple Lane faster than I should have. My father met me at the door, his face ashen, and led me to the bedroom without a word. My mother sat upright in bed, propped against pillows, and when she looked at me, her eyes were completely clear. Not the vague, confused fog I'd grown accustomed to, but sharp and focused and fully present. It was like seeing a ghost of who she used to be. "Claudia," she said, and her voice was steady. "Sit down." I sat in the chair beside the bed, my heart pounding. My father hovered in the doorway, looking like he wanted to run. My mother reached out and gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "You think I didn't know what Graham was doing?" Her voice was cold, matter of fact. I knew. I agreed to it. The room tilted. "What?" "Vanessa has always been fragile. Weak. She needs more help, more support, more protection. You've always been strong, Claudia. You can carry hard things without breaking. I knew Leonard wanted to give you more, and I couldn't let that happen." She spoke without emotion, like she was reciting a grocery list. "When Graham offered to rebalance things to make sure Vanessa would be taken care of, I said yes. I told him to do whatever was necessary. You let him forge documents. You let him drug Dad. You let him steal from me. I made a choice." Her grip on my wrist tightened. Mothers have to make choices. Not fair ones, not equal ones. The choices that keep their children alive. I stared at this woman who'd raised me, who'd sung me lullabies and packed my school lunches, and felt like I was looking at a stranger. So everything, the confusion, the memory loss, is real now. Started real, got worse. But in the beginning, her eyes held mine, cold and clear. I knew exactly what I was doing. We sat in silence for a moment. Then, like a light switch flipping off, the clarity drained from her eyes. She blinked, looked around the room with vague confusion, and smiled sweetly at me. "Hello, dear. Do I know you?" I left the house in a daze, my father calling after me with explanations I didn't want to hear. I drove back to the park where Vanessa still waited shivering on the bench.
I sat down beside her and made a decision that surprised even me. I'll make sure you and the baby are safe. I'll help you, but you have to do something for me. Anything. You have to testify. Tell the truth about Graham, about Evan, about what they've been doing. All of it. Vanessa's face went white. He'll destroy me. He's already destroying you. This is your chance to stop being his victim and start being your own person. I pulled out my phone and called Renee. My sister needs protection, and she's ready to talk. Renee arranged everything within hours. Protective custody through a women's shelter that specialized in financial abuse cases. Prenatal care with a doctor who understood trauma. A safe place where Graham and Evan couldn't find her. Vanessa cried as I drove her there, apologizing over and over until the words lost meaning. I'm not doing this because I forgive you, I told her as we pulled up to the shelter. I'm doing this because that baby deserves better than what we got. Someone has to break this cycle. She nodded, wiping her eyes, and went inside with a social worker who promised to keep her safe. I drove home feeling strange and untethered, like I'd cut loose from something heavy I'd been carrying my entire life. Kindness wasn't weakness. Helping Vanessa wasn't about forgiveness or absolving her of responsibility. It was strategy. It was making sure the next generation didn't inherit this poison. The next morning, I was meeting with Renee to discuss next steps when Evan burst through her office door without warning, his face red with fury. Security was right behind him, but he'd already started shouting. "That baby isn't mine," he yelled, pointing at me like I was personally responsible. "You think you're so smart turning everyone against us. You'll all regret crossing Graham Cole and my family. My mother will destroy you in court. You have no idea what you've started." Security grabbed his arms, but he kept shouting as they dragged him toward the door. "You're finished, all of you." Renee waited until the door closed and the shouting faded down the hallway. Then she looked at me with grim satisfaction. "Well, that was illuminating. And recorded on our security cameras." "His mother?" I asked. "Apparently, Evan comes from money too. We'll need to look into that." She made a note on her legal pad. "But first, let's talk about what he just admitted. If that baby isn't his, then who's the father?" Evan's outburst about the baby not being his opened a door Renee immediately walked through. Within 2 days, she'd filed a motion requesting paternity testing and subpoenaed Evan's financial records from the dealership. What came back was damning in ways I hadn't even anticipated. Evan had been receiving monthly payments from Cedar Senior Planning LLC for the past 2 years, labeled as referral bonuses. The amounts varied, but they totaled over $40,000. He wasn't just Vanessa's boyfriend providing access to discounted cars. He was a paid accomplice actively steering vulnerable elderly clients toward Graham in exchange for cash. The dealership's owner had a side arrangement with Graham clients who signed up for Graham's financial services, got special financing deals, and Evan got a cut of both transactions. When police brought Evan in for questioning, his bravado collapsed within an hour. He admitted everything. Graham had promised him a junior partnership in an expanded operation. The luxury car Vanessa received wasn't a gift from my parents. It was Evan's commission for bringing in 3 high-value clients in 1 quarter. He'd been selling out vulnerable families for dealership bonuses and the promise of future wealth. But his most significant admission was about the baby. "It's not mine," he told the detective, his voice bitter. "She was cheating on me with some guy she met last summer. I didn't even know she was pregnant until 2 weeks ago." The question became, who was the father? The answer came from an unexpected source. Marcus Cole, the EMT who'd treated my father that terrible night, called me and asked if we could meet. We sat in the same diner where I'd met Harold months ago, and Marcus looked nervous in a way that made my chest tighten with anticipation. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his coffee untouched in front of him. "The baby Vanessa's carrying, it's mine." I stared at him, trying to process this information. "Yours. I met her about 6 months after that ambulance call to your parents' house. It was random, a coffee shop, a conversation. I had no idea who she was at first.
By the time I realized she was your sister, we'd already been seeing each other for a few weeks. He looked miserable. She was trying to escape Evan. She said he was controlling and that she felt trapped. She didn't tell me about the financial stuff about Graham, about any of it. I just thought she was in a bad relationship. Does she know you're telling me this? She asked me to. She said you needed to know the truth, that she was done with secrets. Marcus pulled out a folded document from his jacket. This is a sworn affidavit. Everything I saw that night at your parents' house, the sedation, the rushed paperwork, the coercive atmosphere, and something I didn't put in my original report because I wasn't sure what I'd seen. What? I saw Graham pour something into your father's water glass. He did it quickly while everyone was distracted by your mother being helped to a chair. At the time, I assumed it was prescribed medication, something for anxiety or blood pressure. But now, knowing everything else, Marcus pushed the affidavit across the table. That wasn't medicine. He drugged your father so he'd be compliant enough to sign. I took the document with trembling hands. This was eyewitness testimony from a medical professional who'd been present during the crime. Combined with Miguel's recording, it was devastating evidence. Over the next week, Renee brought Vanessa into her office for trial preparation. I sat in on one session watching my sister struggle through her testimony. In the harsh fluorescent light of the conference room, she looked younger than her years, stripped of makeup and confidence. I accepted money from Graham, she admitted, her voice breaking. He told me it was from the trust, that it was my share, and there was nothing wrong with taking it. He said you were being difficult and ungrateful, that you didn't understand how much Mom and Dad were suffering. Tears streamed down her face. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because it was easier than asking questions. What about the Instagram post? Renee asked gently. The one with the car. Vanessa covered her face with her hands. Graham told me to post it. He said it would make Mom and Dad happy to see me grateful, that it would show them their sacrifice was worth it. I didn't think about how it would hurt you. I didn't think about you at all. The weight of her guilt seemed to be crushing her. She looked at me with red, swollen eyes. I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry. I sat beside her and did something that surprised us both. I took her hand. Not because I'd forgiven everything, not because the hurt had disappeared, but because I saw something in her face. I recognized the terrible realization of how thoroughly she'd been used. You're going to testify, I said. You're going to tell the truth. And then you're going to be a better mother than ours was. That's how you make this right. She nodded, unable to speak. Later, as Vanessa left with the social worker from the shelter, Renee turned to me. What you're doing for her, giving her a chance to be better than what she was, that takes real courage. It's not courage. It's necessity. Someone has to break this cycle, or my niece will grow up in the same poison we did. We spent the rest of the afternoon refining our case, building the narrative that would present in court. We had Miguel's recording. We had Marcus's affidavit. We had Evan's confession. We had Mira's emails. We had Harold's testimony about the forged trust amendment. The evidence was overwhelming. I went home that night feeling for the first time like we might actually win this. The illusion lasted exactly 12 hours. The next morning, I woke to an email notification from the county court system. Graham Cole's attorneys had filed a counter-lawsuit against me personally, claiming defamation and seeking $500,000 in damages. The filing argued that my baseless accusations had destroyed Graham's reputation, cost him clients, and caused severe emotional distress. They were demanding a public trial. I called Renee immediately, my hands shaking as I forwarded her the document. He's trying to bankrupt you into silence, she said after reading it. And he's trying to turn this into a public spectacle where your credibility becomes the central issue instead of his crimes. Can he do that? He can file it. Whether it survives a motion to dismiss is another question. Her voice hardened. But Claudia, you need to understand what this means. We're going to trial. A very public trial. And Graham's going to use every dirty trick he knows to destroy you before we ever get to present our evidence.
I looked at my wall of documents, at the timeline I'd built, at the evidence of systemic fraud and abuse. Then I thought of my grandfather's letter, of Marcus's quiet courage, of Vanessa finally choosing truth over comfort. "Let him try," I said. "I'm not backing down now." The preliminary hearing took place 4 months after we filed the lawsuit, in a courtroom packed with local reporters and curious spectators who'd been following the story through increasingly sensational headlines. "Daughter versus Parents. Family Betrayal Trial Grips Community," read one. "Ungrateful child or victim of fraud?" asked another. I walked into that courtroom feeling like I was walking into an arena, and Graham Cole's defense team treated it exactly like blood sport. His attorneys were expensive, polished, and utterly ruthless. They painted me as mentally unstable from the opening statement, suggesting I was experiencing a breakdown brought on by work stress and resentment toward my more successful younger sister. They cited the months I'd refused to help my parents with bills as evidence of my cold, calculating nature. Character witnesses, people I barely knew, testified that I'd always been difficult and ungrateful, that my parents had done their best, but I'd never appreciated their sacrifices. When I took the stand, I kept my voice calm and measured. I detailed the forged trust amendment, the reverse mortgage signed while my mother was under anesthesia, the timeline of systematic theft. But every point I made was buried under objections, procedural maneuvers, and interruptions. Graham's lead attorney, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Vance, had a gift for making truth sound like paranoid delusion. The defense even produced a psychologist who'd never met me but testified about something called caregiver burnout and projection. According to her expert opinion, I was projecting my own financial anxiety onto my parents and creating elaborate conspiracy theories to justify my abandonment of them. The jury listened with concerned expressions, taking notes. But the worst moment came when Vanessa took the stand. We'd prepared for weeks. Renee had walked her through every potential question, every attack the defense might launch. Vanessa had seemed ready, determined to tell the truth, no matter how painful. But the moment Patricia Vance began her cross-examination, I watched my sister crumble. "Isn't it true?" Vance asked, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "That you texted your sister multiple times calling her selfish and jealous?" Vanessa's face went pale. Yes. But that was before I understood. Yes or no, please." "Yes." Vance produced the text messages blown up on a screen for the entire courtroom to see. Messages where Vanessa complained about me being controlling, called me jealous of her relationship with our parents, accused me of trying to ruin the family. Each message was dated, time-stamped, indisputable. Vanessa began crying, her carefully prepared testimony dissolving into incoherent sobs. "I didn't understand what was happening," she tried to explain through tears. "Graham told me she was the problem, that she was being vindictive. So you're admitting you called your own sister vindictive?" "No, I mean yes, but—" Then Vanessa clutched her stomach, her face contorting. "I can't. The stress—" She gasped, loudly, dramatically, and collapsed sideways in the witness box. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for an immediate recess while paramedics rushed in. I sat frozen in my seat, watching them attend to Vanessa, unable to shake the feeling that something about her collapse felt performed, rehearsed. But the effect was devastating. Within 2 hours, while Vanessa was being evaluated at the hospital, tabloid websites were already running headlines, "Lawsuit causes pregnant sister's medical crisis," and "Family feud turns dangerous." I sat in the courthouse hallway while Renee fielded calls from reporters, feeling the walls closing in. "We could withdraw," Renee said quietly. "Regroup, refile when the media circus dies down." "No," my voice was flat, emotionless. "He wins when good people stop speaking. I'm not giving him that satisfaction." 2 weeks later, the judge issued his interim ruling. He dismissed several of our claims, citing insufficient immediate evidence of criminal intent. The forged signatures could have been honest mistakes, he suggested. The questionable timing could be coincidental. The trust amendment, while irregular, didn't meet the threshold for fraud without more concrete proof of Graham's intent to deceive. Our remaining claims could proceed, but the judge's skepticism was clear. Assets would remain frozen, but the momentum had completely shifted. I watched Graham Cole smile that perfect, charming smile as he left the courtroom surrounded by his legal team and giving a statement to reporters about how relieved he was that the truth was finally being recognized. That smile felt like a knife sliding between my ribs, cold and precise. I left through the back exit to avoid the cameras, but reporters found me anyway in the parking garage, shouting questions I didn't answer. I drove home in silence, my hands steady on the wheel, even though my entire world felt like it was collapsing. In my apartment, I stood in front of my evidence wall, all those documents, all those connections, all that proof that I'd thought would be enough. But truth wasn't enough when the other side had money and lawyers who knew how to make lies sound reasonable. I allowed myself one moment of complete breakdown. Alone in my car, parked in my building's garage, I screamed. Not words, just raw sound releasing months of pressure and frustration and fear. Then I breathed, deep, steady breaths until my heart rate slowed and my vision cleared. This wasn't over. It couldn't be over. My grandfather had trusted me to be strong enough to see this through, and I wasn't going to let him down. I started the engine and drove to the gym, worked out until my muscles ached and my mind went quiet. Then I went home, showered, and sat down at my laptop to review our remaining legal options. At 11 that night, my phone lit up with a text from Marcus. Found something in the ambulance company archives. Video footage from the body cam that night. You need to see this now. I stared at those words, my exhaustion vanishing in an instant. Body cam footage. Visual evidence, not just audio. Something that couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding or explained away with legal technicalities. I texted back immediately, where and when. His response came within seconds. My place. I'm sending you the address. Come now. This changes everything. I grabbed my keys and ran. Marcus lived in a modest apartment across town, and when he opened the door, I could see the urgency in his face. He'd set up his laptop on the kitchen table, a USB drive already plugged in. The ambulance company digitizes all body cam footage and stores it for 7 years for liability purposes. He explained, his words tumbling out fast. I remembered I was wearing my cam that night, but I'd never thought to check the footage until now. I had to call in a favor with our IT guy to pull the archived files. He pressed play and I watched the grainy footage unfold. The camera angle was chest height, showing Marcus's perspective as he entered my parents' house 2 years ago. The timestamp in the corner matched the date on the reverse mortgage deed exactly. The video swept across the crowded living room party guests with wine glasses, Evan laughing too loudly near the door, my mother being helped into a chair by someone I didn't recognize. Then the camera panned to the kitchen, and there was Graham Cole standing with his back partially to the camera, holding something small in his hand. A vial. He glanced around quickly, then poured liquid into a water glass sitting on the counter. His voice was low, but the microphone caught it clearly. Just one signature, Tom. Then you can rest. We need to finish before the stress overwhelms you. My father's voice slurred and confused. I don't feel right. Something's wrong. Marcus's voice came from off camera. Sir, is he okay to sign documents right now? He seems disoriented. Graham turned, and even through the grainy footage, I could see his smile smooth and reassuring. His doctor approved it. We're just finalizing some family business. Time-sensitive paperwork that can't wait. The camera moved as Marcus approached my father. I could see Tom slumped at the dining table, his face pale and sweaty. Ellen was visible in the background, slumped in a chair, her eyes half closed. Vanessa hovered near the doorway, wringing her hands, looking young and frightened. The video continued for another 3 minutes. Graham guiding my father's hand to sign documents. Papers being notarized by someone who moved in and out of frame. Then my father collapsing forward, and the organized chaos of Marcus and his partner preparing for transport. I watched it twice more, my hands clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms. This wasn't audio that could be disputed or explained away. This was visual evidence of Graham drugging my father and coercing signatures while he was incapacitated. This ends him, I whispered. I thought so too, Marcus said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find it." "You found it when it mattered most." Renee filed an emergency motion within hours, attaching the body cam footage and Marcus's supplemental affidavit. She argued that this constituted newly discovered evidence that materially affected the case and warranted immediate judicial review. The judge agreed to review the footage privately and scheduled an emergency hearing for 3 days later. The courtroom was even more packed than before when the hearing convened. Word had spread that we had new evidence, and reporters filled every available seat. Graham Cole sat at the defense table looking confident, his attorney Patricia Vance whispering assurances. That confidence evaporated the moment the judge ordered the body cam footage to be played for the court. The room went absolutely silent as the video projected onto a screen. The only sounds were Tom's labored breathing on camera, Graham's incriminating words, Marcus's concerned questions. When Graham's voice said, "His doctor approved it," in that smooth, dismissive tone, several jurors leaned forward, their faces hardening from skepticism to disgust. Graham's face drained of all color. Patricia Vance began objecting frantically on procedural grounds, but the judge overruled her with a sharp gesture. The video played to its conclusion, and when the lights came back up, the damage was absolute and irreversible. The judge began speaking about scheduling a full trial, about the serious nature of the evidence, about potential criminal referrals to the district attorney. Patricia Vance was on her feet, arguing motions and precedents and technicalities, trying desperately to contain the disaster. Then Graham stood up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice shaking, ignoring Patricia's frantic whispers to sit down and shut up. "I need to make a statement." "Mr. Cole, I strongly advise," Patricia began, but Graham cut her off. "I was hired." The words exploded from him, desperate and sharp. "I didn't target the Pierce family randomly. Someone paid me $200,000 to destroy Claudia Pierce's credibility and financial stability." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. I sat frozen, my mind struggling to process what I'd just heard. Graham pulled papers from his jacket pocket with shaking hands. "I have a contract. Encrypted emails with instructions. Bitcoin transaction records showing payments to my offshore account." He looked directly at the judge, his composure completely shattered. "I'm a con man, yes. I've done terrible things. But I'm not the mastermind here. Whoever wanted Claudia ruined is still out there, still operating. Give me a plea deal and witness protection, and I'll tell you everything." The judge ordered Graham taken into custody immediately while his claims were investigated. As bailiffs led him away, he looked at me for the first time since the hearing began. "I'm sorry," he said, "but you need to know they're not done with you. Not even close." The hearing adjourned in chaos. Renee grabbed my arm and pulled me out through a side door while reporters shouted questions. We made it to her car before I finally spoke. "Someone hired him. Someone wanted me specifically destroyed. We'll find out who." Renee's voice was grim. "The FBI will trace those Bitcoin payments. We'll get answers." That night, alone in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt threatening. At 2 a.m, my laptop chimed with an email notification from an encrypted address I didn't recognize. I opened it with trembling hands. The message contained a single line: "You should have stayed quiet. Now everyone you love will pay. VM." VM. I stared at those initials, my mind racing. Then I remembered Evan's outburst in Renee's office. "My mother will destroy you in court. You have no idea what you've started." Victoria Marsh. Evan's mother. The mastermind behind everything wasn't Graham Cole at all. Victoria Marsh. The initials VM suddenly made terrible sense. Renee hired a forensic cybersecurity expert named David Chen, who spent 3 weeks unraveling the digital trail Graham had left behind. The Bitcoin payments had been routed through multiple VPN servers and shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands and Delaware, each layer designed to obscure the source.
But David was patient and methodical, and eventually patterns emerged. The final originating IP address traced back to a law office in downtown Marsh & Associates LLC. When David showed me the documentation, my hands went numb. Victoria Marsh was a semi-retired corporate attorney with a reputation for aggressive litigation and questionable ethics. She'd made her fortune representing pharmaceutical companies in liability cases, earning millions by burying evidence and intimidating witnesses. And she was Evan's mother. Why would she target me specifically? I asked Renee, staring at Victoria's professional photo on her law firm's website. She looked elegant and composed, pearls at her throat every inch the successful attorney. That's what we need to find out, and we need her confession on record. The plan was risky, but necessary. With a court order and police cooperation, I would wear a wire and arrange to meet Victoria under the pretense of discussing a settlement. The police would monitor remotely, ready to move in the moment she incriminated herself. We couldn't use her office or anywhere she might have security measures, so I suggested a public cafe she frequented, upscale enough for her standards, but open enough for surveillance. I called Victoria's office and left a message with her assistant saying I wanted to discuss resolving the matter privately before it escalated further. She called back within an hour, her voice smooth and professional. "Ms. Pierce, how refreshing that you're finally ready to be reasonable. Thursday at 2, Café Lumiere downtown. I trust you'll come alone." Of course. Thursday arrived cold and bright. I wore the wire taped to my chest under my blouse, the small microphone hidden in a button. 2 plainclothes officers sat at separate tables in the cafe, and a surveillance van was parked across the street. Renee had coached me on what to say, how to get Victoria talking, how to let her arrogance do the work. Victoria arrived exactly on time, dressed in an expensive suit with pearls that probably cost more than my car. She ordered an espresso and studied me with the cool assessment of someone used to evaluating opponents. "You wanted to talk settlement," she said without preamble. "What are you proposing?" "I want to understand something first. Why me? Why did you pay Graham Cole $200,000 to destroy my life?" I expected denial, deflection, legal maneuvering. Instead, Victoria smiled faintly and took a sip of her espresso. "Because you were the obstacle," she said simply. "Evan intended to marry your sister. He'd been infatuated with her for over a year. Marriage would have legally tied our family to yours, a family drowning in debt, scandal, and dysfunction. I couldn't allow that liability. So you hired Graham to eliminate you as a factor. You were the responsible one, the anchor Vanessa would run to when things got difficult. I needed her isolated and desperate." Victoria's voice was clinical, like she was discussing a business transaction. "The plan was elegant, really. Graham would drain your parents' resources while making it look like you were the problem. Your reputation would be destroyed through social pressure and legal battles. Vanessa, with no sister to support her and a family in ruins, would accept whatever terms I offered in a prenuptial agreement. Full financial control, limited contact with her relatives, protection of our family assets. You were willing to destroy an entire family for a prenup. I was willing to protect my family's interests from contamination. Your parents were already being manipulated by Graham. I simply accelerated and redirected his efforts." She leaned back completely calm. "I underestimated your resilience. Most people would have given up months ago. But you kept digging, kept fighting. Admirable, really, if ultimately futile." "Futile? You're confessing to conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse." Victoria's smile didn't waver. "Proving any of that in court is another matter entirely. Graham is a convicted con man whose testimony is worthless. You have no physical evidence connecting me to—" The cafe door opened, and 2 plainclothes officers walked directly to our table. Victoria's smile finally faltered as one of them spoke. "Victoria Marsh, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and witness intimidation. You have the right to remain silent." I watched Victoria's face transform from confident composure to genuine shock as handcuffs were placed on her wrists. She looked at me with something like grudging respect. You were wearing a wire. Every word you said was recorded and transmitted to the district attorney's office in real time. They led her out through the cafe past staring customers and a barista filming on her phone. By that evening, the story had broken nationally. Prominent attorney arrested in elaborate elder fraud scheme, read the headlines. Graham, now fully cooperating in exchange for a reduced sentence, provided additional documentation showing Victoria had orchestrated similar schemes with other vulnerable families, always staying one step removed, always using people like Graham as her instruments. The walls were finally closing in on everyone who'd hurt my family. I went home exhausted, feeling not triumph but a hollow kind of vindication. Justice was happening, but it felt mechanical and cold. Nothing like the cathartic victory I'd once imagined. I was reviewing the day's events with Renee over the phone when my father's number flashed on my screen. "Claudia, you need to come to the hospital right now." His voice was shaking. "Your mother collapsed an hour ago. They're running tests, but it doesn't look good. She's asking for you. She keeps saying your name over and over." I grabbed my keys and ran for the door. Renee's voice still coming through my phone asking what was wrong. But I was already gone, driving through downtown traffic toward Cedar Valley Medical Center, toward my mother who'd betrayed me and loved me, and was now possibly dying, still calling my name. I found my father sitting in a plastic chair beside my mother's ICU bed, his face ashen and aged in a way that made him look a decade older than he was. Ellen lay surrounded by machines, monitors beeping rhythmically, tubes running from her arms, her chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance. She was stable, the nurse told me, but they were still running tests to determine what had caused the collapse. My father looked up when I entered, and something in his face crumbled. He grabbed my hand with both of his grip desperate and trembling. "I knew," he said, his voice breaking. "I knew Graham was shady. I knew it wasn't right. But I wanted to look like a provider, like I could still take care of this family without burdening you." Tears streamed down his weathered face into the lines carved by years of pride and shame. "When your mother's surgery bills came, when my hours got cut at work, when the mortgage payments started slipping, I felt like such a failure. And then Graham showed up with his smooth talk and his solutions, and I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe there was an easy way out." I pulled a chair close and sat down, still holding his hand. My own tears were falling now, months of anger and hurt finally breaking through the dam I'd built around my heart. "Pride made me sign those papers," he continued, "and shame made me stay quiet when I should have told you the truth. I let him drug me that night, not on purpose, but I felt something was wrong and I signed anyway, because I was afraid if I stopped, if I asked questions, the whole thing would fall apart and everyone would see what a failure I was." "Dad," my voice came out rough, "you were always enough. You didn't need to prove anything to anyone. You worked hard your whole life. You raised us. That was enough." He shook his head, unable to speak, but squeezed my hand once with what little strength he had left. Then his grip went slack with exhaustion, and he slumped back in his chair, staring at my mother's unconscious form. Over the next few days, I barely left the hospital. I took a leave of absence from work, sleeping in uncomfortable waiting room chairs, eating vending machine food, keeping vigil. My mother drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid for a few moments, mostly lost in whatever fog her mind had retreated to. On the third day, she woke while I was sitting beside her bed reading. Her eyes were clear, truly clear for the first time in months. "Claudia." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, Mom." She turned her head slowly to look at me, and in her eyes I saw full awareness, full memory, full understanding of everything that had happened. "I signed first," she whispered. "Decades ago. I begged Leonard to change his will to split everything equally, even though he wanted to give you more. I started this whole chain of events." Her voice cracked, tears sliding down her pale cheeks. "Forgive me." I pulled my chair closer and took her frail hand in mine. Her skin was paper thin, her bones fragile as a bird's. I thought about all the years she'd protected Vanessa at my expense, all the times she'd chosen the easy path over the honest one, all the ways her fear had poisoned our family. And I thought about how she was being punished now, trapped in a mind that could no longer hold on to truth or memory, forced to watch her choices destroy the people she loved. "I forgive you, Mom," I whispered. Her eyes closed peacefully, and within moments she'd drifted back into that fog, her hand going slack in mine. But I sat there holding it anyway, watching the monitors track her heartbeat, feeling the weight of roles reversing. I was the parent now. She was the child who needed care and forgiveness and protection from her own past. Marcus came to visit that afternoon, bringing flowers he'd picked up from the hospital gift shop. We sat together in the waiting room, not talking much, just existing in the same space while other families dealt with their own crises around us. "How are you holding up?" he asked finally. "I don't know, numb, mostly." He nodded, not rushing to fill the silence with empty reassurances. After a while, he said, "Healing isn't the same as forgetting. You can move forward without pretending none of this happened. The scars don't have to disappear for you to be okay." I looked at this man who'd stumbled into my nightmare and somehow become an anchor, not dramatic or heroic, just steady and present and honest. "Thank you," I said, "for everything, for the video, for testifying, for being here. Where else would I be?" We sat there as the afternoon light faded through the waiting room windows, and I understood something I hadn't before. Justice was what happened in courtrooms, verdicts, and sentences and legal consequences. But peace was something different entirely. Peace was built slowly, one honest conversation at a time, one moment of forgiveness after another, one decision to keep moving forward, even when the past still hurt. Justice was what I'd won against Graham and Victoria. Peace was what I was building here in this hospital room with my broken father and my fading mother and a man who'd chosen to stand beside me when he could have easily walked away. 2 days later, I was home trying to catch up on sleep when Renee called. Her voice had that particular edge that meant bad news. The forensic audit just came back from the accounting firm the court hired. "Claudia, you need to sit down." "I'm already sitting." "There's more money missing than we ever imagined. Over $600,000 siphoned through various accounts and shell companies over the past 5 years. She paused. "And here's the part that's going to make you sick. Most of it was funneled through accounts labeled under your name. Claudia's Support Fund, C. Pierce Family Trust, Pierce Claudia Estate Management. Graham and Victoria set you up to look like the ones stealing from your own parents." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the enormity of it. They hadn't just stolen from me. They'd framed me for the theft, created a paper trail that made me look like the predator instead of the victim. If I hadn't fought back, if I'd given up at any point, that false evidence would have stood unchallenged, and history would have recorded me as the villain of my own story. "Can we prove it wasn't me?" I asked. "We already have. The forensic accountant traced every transaction. But Claudia, this changes the restitution calculation significantly. You're owed far more than we thought. This goes to trial next month, and you need to decide what you want to do with that money when we win." I looked around my quiet apartment at the life I'd built through hard work and sacrifice, and thought about my grandfather's letter about integrity being worth more than gold. The money had never really been the point. But now, having the chance to reclaim it, I had to decide what kind of person I wanted to be on the other side of this nightmare. The forensic accountant the district attorney hired was a meticulous woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who presented her findings in Renee's conference room with the detached precision of a surgeon describing a complicated operation. She spread spreadsheets across the table, each column color-coded, each transaction traced back to its source through layers of shell companies and fraudulent documentation. Over the past 5 years, Dr. Chen explained, approximately $600,000 was systematically siphoned from your family's accounts through a sophisticated network of fake consulting fees, inflated service charges, and fraudulent trust distributions. She pointed to a particularly dense section of her report. But here's where it gets truly insidious. Much of that money was funneled through accounts specifically labeled to implicate you. Claudia's Support Fund, C. Pierce Family Trust, Pierce Claudia Estate Management. Every dollar you wired to help your parents with bills was carefully redirected and documented to make it appear as though you were the one draining their finances. I stared at the spreadsheets, trying to comprehend the scale of the deception. Red ink filled column after column, representing years of calculated manipulation. They hadn't just stolen from me, they'd constructed an elaborate frame ensuring that if anyone ever investigated, all evidence would point to me as the exploiter. So if I hadn't fought back, I said slowly, if I'd given up at any point, you would have looked like the criminal, Dr. Chen confirmed. Graham and Victoria built a paper trail that would have destroyed your credibility and potentially exposed you to criminal charges. It's one of the most sophisticated financial abuse schemes I've encountered in 20 years of forensic accounting. The nausea I felt wasn't from the amount stolen. It was from understanding how thoroughly they'd tried to erase my voice to ensure I could never tell my story without being dismissed as the villain. After Dr. Chen left, Renee poured us both coffee and sat across from me with the expression she wore when delivering difficult news. We need to talk about restitution. The court will liquidate Graham and Victoria's assets, their homes, investment accounts, the consulting firm, everything. Based on preliminary valuations, you're looking at recovering approximately $400,000 after legal fees and tax penalties. That's yours. Legally, morally, ethically, yours. Or we negotiate a settlement that prioritizes your parents' immediate stability. Pay off the reverse mortgage, establish a care fund for your mother's medical expenses, ensure they have housing security. She paused. But Claudia, the practical choice here is to keep the money. You've lost years of savings helping them. You've paid tens of thousands in legal fees. This is your chance to rebuild. I thought about my grandfather's letter about his words that wealth wasn't what we kept, but what we returned in kindness. I thought about baby Grace, who would grow up either inheriting this cycle of manipulation or learning a different way. I thought about Vanessa trying so hard to become someone better, and I thought about all the other families out there right now being exploited by people like Graham and Victoria families who didn't have the resources or knowledge or stubborn determination to fight back. I want to establish a foundation, I said. The Leonard Pierce Foundation, dedicated to preventing elder financial abuse. I'll take enough to cover my legal fees and lost wages, maybe $50,000 total. The rest goes into the foundation. Free legal clinics, financial literacy workshops for seniors, a 24-hour hotline for families who think they're being exploited. Renee set down her coffee cup carefully. That's $250,000 you're giving away. I'm not giving it away. I'm using it to end the pattern. If I keep that money, I'm still tied to what Graham did, still benefiting from the poison he spread. I want to be free of it completely. I met her eyes. Let it end clean. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll draw up the paperwork. When the news broke that I was donating the majority of my restitution to create an elder abuse prevention foundation, reporters started calling. Local news wanted interviews. A national morning show requested an appearance. I declined them all, uncomfortable with being labeled a hero for doing what felt like basic human decency. This isn't about being noble, I told Marcus one afternoon over coffee. It's about breaking free. If I kept that money every time I spent it, I'd remember where it came from. I'd be carrying Graham and Victoria around in my wallet for the rest of my life. Marcus smiled in that quiet way of his. Most people would have kept it anyway. The fact that you can't is exactly why you should. That's the most heroic thing I've ever heard. The foundation launched within 3 months. We rented a small office downtown, hired 2 staff members, and brought Mira Lopez on as assistant director. For Mira, it was more than a job. It was a path to permanent residency, a chance to help other immigrants avoid the exploitation she'd endured, a way to transform her trauma into purpose. Our first free legal clinic saw 12 families. By the 3rd month, we were fielding 40 calls a week on our hotline, seniors who'd signed documents they didn't understand, adult children discovering suspicious withdrawals, families trapped in the same web of shame and manipulation that had nearly destroyed mine. One evening, as I sat in my apartment organizing foundation paperwork and reviewing grant applications, my phone rang. It was the hospice facility where my mother had been moved after her condition stabilized enough to leave the ICU, but deteriorated enough that hospital care was no longer appropriate. "Ms. Pierce, this is Nurse Patricia. Your mother had a moment of clarity about an hour ago. She was quite insistent that I call you with a message." My heart clenched. "Is she okay?" "She's resting now, but she wanted me to tell you something specific. She said, 'Tell Claudia I signed first. Tell her I'm the one who should apologize.' She repeated it 3 times to make sure I had it exactly right before she drifted back off." I thanked the nurse and hung up, staring at my phone. My mother, in one of her rare moments of true lucidity, had used it to take responsibility. Not to make excuses. Not to ask for forgiveness again. Just to make sure I knew where the original sin had occurred, who had opened the door that let all this darkness in. I drove to the hospice facility even though visiting hours were over, and the night nurse let me sit beside my mother's bed. She slept peacefully, her breathing shallow but steady, her face finely relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. I held her hand and whispered, "I know, Mom, and I forgive you. For all of it." She didn't wake, but her fingers tightened around mine for just a moment before going slack again. I sat there until dawn, watching my mother sleep, thinking about cycles and choices and the strange mathematics of forgiveness. The hospice called 3 days later. My mother's condition had deteriorated rapidly, and the staff believed she had only hours left. I drove through early morning traffic, my hands steady on the wheel, despite the grief building in my chest. When I arrived, the nurse led me to my mother's room where she lay propped on pillows, her breathing labored, but her eyes miraculously completely clear. "Claudia." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was her voice fully present, fully aware. I pulled a chair close and took her hand. She gripped my wrist with surprising strength, as if holding on to me could anchor her to consciousness for just a little longer. "I need to tell you everything," she said. "Before I can't anymore. Mom, you should rest." "No. Listen." She took a shaking breath. "When Leonard drafted his will all those years ago, he wanted to leave you more. Not because he loved you more, but because he saw in you what I was too afraid to see, that you were strong enough to carry hard things. He told me, Claudia has integrity. She'll be fine no matter what happens. He wanted to give you a larger share to honor that strength." Tears slid down her pale cheeks. But I begged him not to. I cried and pleaded, said it would destroy Vanessa to feel less loved. I told him she was fragile, that she needed the security of knowing she was treated equally. He finally agreed, but he made me promise no changes after his death. Both girls get exactly what was intended. "And then he died," I said quietly. "And then he died, and my fear got worse instead of better. I convinced myself that Vanessa deserved more because she needed more. That you were so strong you didn't need the money the way she did." Her voice cracked. "When Graham approached with his solution, when he said he could rebalance things to help Vanessa without you even knowing, I didn't resist. I told myself it was compassion. It was cowardice. He said it would fix my mistake." She continued, her grip tightening. "He made it sound so reasonable, so loving. And I was so afraid of Vanessa falling apart, of being the bad mother who let her weak child suffer. I thought I was protecting her. I was just poisoning all of us." I pulled my chair even closer and held her frail hand in both of mine. "You did wrong for the right reasons," I said softly. "And I've done the same thing my whole life, tried to fix everything, control everything, carry everyone so they wouldn't have to hurt. We're more alike than I wanted to admit. 2 women separated by generation and circumstance, finally equal in our shared understanding of how love could curdle into harm when mixed with fear." Ellen's breathing slowed, her eyes beginning to drift. "Thank you," she whispered, "for choosing me again, even after everything." Outside the window, the first snow of December fell in soft, silent flakes.
I sat holding my mother's hand as her breathing grew more peaceful, watching winter settle over the world. Forgiveness. I understood now wasn't about absolving someone of their crimes. It was about deciding not to let their choices continue dictating your future. It was freedom not for them, but for yourself. Ellen drifted into sleep and never woke again. She died peacefully 3 hours later, with me still holding her hand. The funeral was small. My father, Vanessa, Marcus, Renee, a handful of old family friends. We buried her beside Leonard in the cemetery, where oak trees stood sentinel over rows of quiet stones. 6 weeks later, the court finalized the asset redistribution from Graham and Victoria's liquidated holdings. After legal fees and various deductions, there was $550,000 to be divided. The judge awarded me $400,000 and allocated $150,000 to Vanessa, recognizing her as both a partial victim and participant in the scheme. We met in Renee's office for the final signing. Vanessa arrived with Marcus holding his hand, her pregnancy now visible in the gentle curve of her belly. When Renee presented the settlement documents, Vanessa read through them carefully, then set down her pen. "I'm not signing," she said quietly. Renee looked up sharply. "Vanessa, this money is legally yours." "I don't want it. I don't deserve it." Vanessa looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Keep it, Claudia. Use it for the foundation, or keep it yourself, or do whatever you want with it. But I'm going to raise Grace on my own terms, with money I earn myself, not money stolen from my sister." I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of a knot I'd carried for so long, I'd forgotten it was there. "What if we split my portion?" I said. $200,000 for me, $200,000 for Grace, not as a gift to you, but as an investment in her future. A trust fund you can't touch, managed by a third-party trustee, only accessible for her education and necessities when she turns 18. Vanessa's face crumpled. "You'd do that? After everything?" "Someone has to break the cycle," I said. "Grace deserves a chance to grow up without this poison." Vanessa stood and crossed to where I sat, and for the first time in years, maybe the first time ever, we embraced not out of obligation, but genuine connection. "Thank you," she whispered against my shoulder. "Thank you for not giving up on me." We revised the settlement documents, Renee shaking her head with something like amazed disbelief. Marcus squeezed my shoulder as we signed his quiet pride, meaning more than any grand gesture could. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in a year. Not because of the money, but because I'd finally found a way to move forward that honored both justice and mercy, that held people accountable while still offering grace. Christmas Eve arrived with unexpected warmth, a rare December day when the sun actually felt like it had heat behind it. I was organizing foundation paperwork in my apartment when the buzzer rang. A courier stood in the hallway holding a thick envelope, the paper expensive and heavy. "Claudia Pierce, sign here, please." I signed and took the envelope, my breath catching when I saw the writing on the front. Elegant script in fountain pen ink, to Claudia Pierce, to be opened on Christmas Day. From Leonard Pierce, posthumous delivery arranged by Harold Whitcomb. I stood in my doorway holding my grandfather's final message, knowing that whatever it contained would either break me or finally set me free. I set Leonard's envelope on my dining table and left it there unopened through Christmas Eve. Whatever my grandfather wanted to tell me had waited this long, it could wait one more day. First, there were other endings that needed to be witnessed, other chapters that needed closing. The sentencing hearings took place over 3 cold days in February. Graham Cole stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, his silver hair unchanged, but his confident demeanor completely shattered. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison for elder fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Graham's attorney argued for leniency based on his cooperation, but the judge was unmoved. "You systematically exploited vulnerable seniors and their families for profit," she said. "That betrayal of trust demands accountability." Victoria Marsh's sentencing came 2 days later.
She stood ramrod straight, still projecting dignity, even in her prison uniform. 15 years for orchestrating the scheme with additional charges for witness intimidation and money laundering. Her attorney filed an immediate appeal, but watching her being led away in handcuffs, I knew she'd exhausted all her advantages. The system, slow and imperfect as it was, had finally caught up to her. Evan received a suspended sentence in exchange for his extensive cooperation with prosecutors. 5 years of probation, community service, and permanent loss of his professional licenses. He'd lost his job at the dealership, his relationship with Vanessa, and any hope of the partnership Graham had promised him. I saw him once in the courthouse hallway, looking years older than when this all began. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Mira Lopez's story had a happier ending. Granted full immunity for her testimony, and with the Foundation's support, she became a United States citizen that spring. At the ceremony, she wept as she took the oath, and afterward she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I'm going to help other people like me," she promised. "Nobody else should have to choose between silence and deportation." The trials concluded not with dramatic revelations or courtroom outbursts, but with quiet procedural justice. Papers were filed. Sentences were recorded. The guilty were led away. It felt anticlimactic in a way that also felt right, not a Hollywood ending, but the slow grinding of accountability that happens when institutions finally work the way they're supposed to. 6 months later, the Leonard Pierce Foundation opened its doors in a modest office downtown, 3 rooms with donated furniture and a determination to do good work. I served as founder and board chair. Mira became our executive director, managing a small staff of volunteers and part-time advocates. We offered free legal consultations for families dealing with elder exploitation, financial literacy workshops at senior centers, and a 24-hour hotline for anyone who suspected abuse. The local news covered our opening, and a reporter asked me why I'd chosen to donate the restitution money rather than keep it. My grandfather believed wealth is measured by what we return, not what we keep, I told the small crowd gathered in our cramped office. This foundation is his legacy, not mine. I'm just the person making sure his values outlive him. By our 3rd month, we were fielding 50 calls a week. Seniors who'd signed documents they didn't understand. Adult children discovering suspicious account activity. Families trapped in the same shame and confusion that had nearly destroyed mine. Each case broke my heart and strengthened my resolve. This work mattered. This was how you honored the dead, by protecting the living. Vanessa gave birth on a cold November night 3 weeks before her due date. Marcus called me from the hospital at 2 a.m, his voice shaking with exhausted joy. "It's a girl, Grace Ellen Lopez Pierce. Everyone's healthy." I arrived at the hospital as dawn broke, bringing flowers and a teddy bear I'd bought weeks ago but been too superstitious to give her early. Vanessa looked exhausted and radiant. Her hair pulled back her face, makeup-free and more beautiful than I'd ever seen it. Marcus sat beside her bed holding a tiny bundle wrapped in pink blankets, his eyes red from crying happy tears. "Do you want to hold her?" Vanessa asked. I'd been unsure if I'd even be welcome in that room, uncertain whether Vanessa would want to share this moment with the sister who'd spent the past year dismantling her life to expose the truth. But she held out her arms, and I took Grace carefully, this impossibly small person who weighed less than a bag of flour and somehow contained all our hopes for breaking cycles and doing better. Grace's eyes were closed, her tiny fist curled against her cheek. She had Vanessa's delicate features and Marcus's steady calm already visible somehow in her sleeping face. Looking at her, I saw not the past but possibility. A chance to raise someone in truth instead of lies in honesty, instead of manipulation in love that didn't require anyone to be less than they were. "She'll know the truth," Vanessa said quietly. "About all of it. About Grandpa Leonard and what happened to his trust. About Graham and Victoria. About how you fought for us even when we didn't deserve it." Her voice caught. "No secrets, no favoritism, just honesty." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and handed Grace back to her mother. Marcus squeezed my shoulder as I left, his silent gratitude meaning more than any words could convey. My father had moved into an assisted living facility after my mother's death, a modest place with kind staff and group activities he mostly avoided. I visited him once a week, bringing groceries and sitting with him while he watched game shows and pretended the past hadn't happened. We didn't talk about the trial or the money or any of it. Some wounds were too deep for words. But I kept showing up because that's what you did for family, not because they deserved it, but because you decided you were the kind of person who didn't abandon people, even when they'd abandoned you first. Christmas Eve arrived with unseasonable warmth and clear skies. I sat alone in my apartment, the Leonard Pierce Foundation's first quarterly report spread across my table, alongside budget projections for the coming year. We'd helped 37 families, prevented 4 fraudulent trust amendments, and connected 12 seniors with pro bono legal representation. My grandfather would have been proud. His envelope sat beside my laptop, still unopened, the paper yellowed with age, but the handwriting still strong and clear. To Claudia Pierce, to be opened on Christmas Day. Tomorrow I would open it and read whatever final wisdom Leonard had left for me. But tonight I simply held it against my chest and felt the weight of his love reaching across time and death to remind me that some gifts don't arrive when we want them. They arrive when we're finally ready to receive them. Outside my window, the city sparkled with holiday lights, and somewhere in a hospital room, my sister held her daughter while the man who loved them both kept watch. Somewhere in a modest office downtown, files waited for Monday morning when we'd start helping families all over again. Somewhere in a prison cell, Graham Cole faced 12 years of consequences for his choices. And here in my quiet apartment on Christmas Eve, I held my grandfather's last words and felt for the first time in longer than I could remember, something that might have been peace. Christmas morning arrived with pale winter sunlight streaming through my apartment windows. I made coffee and sat at my dining table, Leonard's envelope positioned in front of me like a gift I'd finally earned the right to open. My hands trembled as I carefully broke the seal, pulling out pages, written in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting, the ink slightly faded but still legible. Claudia, my dearest girl, it began. If you're reading this, it means Harold kept his promise to deliver it after the legal dust settled. By now you know about Trust B, the offshore account I never told your grandmother about. That money, $800,000, was never meant as a simple inheritance. It was a test. If you used it for revenge, to hoard wealth, to punish your family for their failings, then I failed to teach you what truly matters. But if you shared it, used it to heal wounds and help others who suffer as you suffered, then you understood the lesson I tried to model my whole life. Wealth is not what we keep, but what we return in kindness. I knew Ellen would favor Vanessa. I watched it happen for years and chose not to intervene because I believed your mother's love, however misguided, came from genuine fear of failing her weaker child. I knew Tom's pride would make him vulnerable to anyone who promised easy solutions to hard problems. And I knew you'd carry the hardest weight because you're strong enough to bear it without breaking. But I also knew you'd be the one to break the cycle. Not through bitterness or retaliation, but through the same quiet integrity you've shown since you were a little girl who wouldn't take credit for work that wasn't yours, who saved her allowance to buy her sister birthday presents even when your sister never remembered yours. The money in Trust B is yours truly and completely. Use it as you see fit. But know that I'm proudest not of what you have, but of who you've become, someone who understands that the greatest inheritance isn't currency, but character. With all my love across time and death, Grandpa Leonard. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, feeling my grandfather's presence as strongly as if he were sitting across the table from me. He'd known. He'd anticipated everything, the favoritism, the exploitation, the test of what I would do when given the power to either hoard or share. And somehow, without knowing what he'd written, I'd passed. That evening, I hosted Christmas dinner in my small apartment. Nothing fancy, I wasn't equipped for elaborate entertaining, but warm and genuine. Renee arrived first with 2 bottles of wine and stories about her newest elder abuse case, which we were consulting on pro bono. Mira came next with her 6-year-old son Diego, who immediately sprawled on my carpet with toy cars I'd bought specifically for him. Harold Whitcomb arrived looking frail, but happy, grateful to see the foundation thriving, and justice finally served before his own health failed him. "Your grandfather would be so proud," he told me, gripping my hands with his papery ones. "You did what I couldn't, you stood up and fought back." Marcus and Vanessa were the last to arrive, Grace bundled in a hand-knitted blanket that Vanessa had made during long nights of insomnia and healing. The baby was awake and alert, her dark eyes taking in the lights and faces with solemn curiosity. When Vanessa handed her to me, Grace wrapped her tiny fingers around my thumb with surprising strength. "She's got your grandfather's grip," Marcus observed with a smile. We gathered around my small dining table, which I'd extended with a folding card table to fit everyone. The meal was simple roast chicken from the grocery store deli, mashed potatoes I'd actually made from scratch, green beans rolls, and a store-bought apple pie. But the conversation was rich and real, full of laughter, and the easy comfort of people who'd survived hard things together and come out changed, but whole. When it was time for dessert, I stood and raised my glass of wine. "To truth," I said, looking at each face around the table. "To peace," and to grace in every meaning of the word. They echoed, the toast glasses clinking, and for a moment I felt suspended in something precious and fleeting, the knowledge that this moment mattered, that we'd built something worth protecting from the ruins of what had been destroyed. After everyone left, I stood at my apartment window, watching snow begin to fall over the city. Fat, lazy flakes that caught the streetlights and turned the urban landscape into something almost magical. I thought about Leonard's letter about his test that I'd passed without knowing I was being evaluated. I thought about the $800,000 in Trust B that I'd already quietly divided $400,000 to the Leonard Pierce Foundation's endowment, $400,000 to an untouchable trust fund for Grace's education and future, managed by a bank with strict disbursement rules that neither Vanessa nor I could override. I'd kept nothing for myself, not because I was noble or selfless, but because keeping that money would have meant carrying Graham and Victoria and all their poison forward into my future. I wanted to be free of it completely, and freedom I'd learned sometimes meant giving away the very thing others would kill to possess. My phone buzzed with a text from my father at the assisted living facility. "Merry Christmas, Claudia. Thank you for not giving up on me." I texted back, "Merry Christmas, Dad. I love you." Simple words, but they meant something now in a way they hadn't before. Love wasn't pretending the past didn't happen. It was choosing to show up anyway, to keep building relationship, even when trust was fractured, to hold space for people to become better than they'd been. Somewhere in the city, church bells began ringing, their sound carrying faintly through the falling snow. I closed my eyes and felt it, the thing I'd been chasing for a year without knowing what to call it. Not happiness exactly, and not victory. Something quieter and more enduring. Peace. The kind that came not from avoiding hard things, but from walking through them and emerging on the other side with your integrity intact. The story that began with a betrayal on Christmas morning 1 year ago had ended with understanding, not because the wounds had disappeared or the damage had been undone, but because I'd chosen to stop letting those wounds define every choice I made going forward. I thought of my grandfather's letter, of his belief that the greatest inheritance was character, not currency. I thought of baby Grace sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, carrying no burden from the past, offered a future built on honesty instead of secrets. I thought of the foundation that would help families long after I was gone, turning one family's tragedy into protection for countless others. Some gifts, I realized as I finally climbed into bed with a contentment I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember, only arrive once we stop demanding them on our own terms. They come quietly, in moments we're not expecting, carried not by what we receive, but by what we choose to give away. The snow continued falling outside my window as I drifted toward sleep, and my last conscious thought was gratitude for my grandfather's wisdom, for the people who'd stood beside me, for the strength to fight and the grace to forgive, and for this moment of hard-won peace that felt finally like coming home. And so Claudia's journey came full circle from betrayal to justice, from anger to understanding, from isolation to community. What began as a stolen Christmas ended with a legacy that would protect countless families from the same exploitation her own had endured. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight aren't against villains in courtrooms, but against the voices in our own heads that tell us to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to let injustice slide because speaking up is too difficult, too messy, too painful. Claudia chose differently. She chose truth over comfort, accountability over false peace, and in doing so, she didn't just save herself, she broke a generational cycle that would have poisoned her niece's future the way it had poisoned hers. If this story moved you, if you found yourself rooting for Claudia through every twist and setback, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. These tales of courage, resilience, and justice matter because they remind us that ordinary people can stand up to extraordinary corruption and win. What did you think of Claudia's decision to donate the restitution money instead of keeping it? Was she right to forgive her mother and sister, or should she have walked away completely? And here's the question that's been on my mind since I started writing this. If you discovered your family had stolen your inheritance, would you have the strength to fight back the way Claudia did, or would you choose to let it go, to preserve the relationship? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your perspectives always add depth to these stories. Should Claudia have kept the money for herself after everything she'd been through? Let me know what you would have done in her position. And if you know someone dealing with elder financial abuse or family exploitation, please share this story with them. Sometimes people need to hear that they're not alone, that fighting back is possible, and that justice, though slow and painful, can prevail. Thank you for spending these hours with Claudia Vanessa Leonard and everyone whose lives intersected in this tangled web of family money and ultimately redemption. Until next time, remember the greatest inheritance we can leave isn't wealth. It's the courage to do what's right even when it costs us everything.